Hey, I'm Meredith Anderson, 28 years old, doing great in the marketing world. But my family life? That's a whole different story. Let me take you back to where it all began 20 years ago. My mom, Linda, was about to give birth to my little sister, Sophie. Everything was fine, until it wasn't. Mom's heart stopped suddenly, and my dad, Robert, had to make an impossible choice. Save my mom or save the baby. He chose to save Mom. Sophie survived, but her brain was damaged. Meredith, honey, can you help Sophie with lunch? Mom's voice snaps me back to the present. I look at Sophie, now 20, but mentally still like a toddler. Sure, Mom, I reply, trying not to sound frustrated. Dad walks in, looking guilty as always. How's my girl doing today? He asks Sophie, not really expecting her to answer. She's fine, Robert, Mom says sharply. The tension in the room is thick. Dad leaves to bury himself in work like usual. I'm heading out, I say, grabbing my keys. But it's family dinner night, Mom protests. I've got a big presentation tomorrow, I explain. Mom looks disappointed but nods. As I walk out, I hear Sophie trying to say my name. It breaks my heart every time. The next day at work, I'm on fire. My boss, Mr. Thompson, is impressed with my presentation. Anderson, you've outdone yourself, he says, smiling. Keep this up, and that corner office might be yours soon. I feel proud. This is what I've been working for, to prove that despite my difficult family situation, I can still succeed. Later, I'm having coffee with my best friend Jess. You look exhausted, she says. I sigh. Just the usual family drama. What if Sophie? I start but stop myself. If Sophie what? Jess asks. Nothing. I shake my head. I feel guilty even thinking about it. You can't keep bottling this up, Jess says kindly. Have you thought about therapy? I scoff. And say what? That I resent my sister for existing. I'm not a monster. That's not what I meant, Jess says firmly. I know she's right, but I'm not ready to face all of that. Instead, I focus on work, building a life away from the chaos at home. As I drive home that night, I wonder, how long can I keep running from my past? How long before it catches up with me? Little did I know, the real storm was about to hit, and it would change everything. When I was 13, my world fell apart. It was a hot summer evening, and I was heading to the kitchen for a snack when I heard them, Mom and Dad, arguing loudly from their bedroom. How long, Robert? How long has this been going on? Mom's voice was filled with anger. Linda, please, it's not what you think, Dad tried to explain. Not what I think. I found the text. Robert, you've been sleeping with your secretary. My heart raced. I pressed myself against the wall, frozen in shock. It started before Sophie was born. I was weak, Dad admitted. Before Sophie? You mean when I was pregnant? When our daughter almost died? Mom's voice was full of hurt. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad had cheated while Mom was pregnant with Sophie. I ended it, Linda. I swear, Dad said desperately. Liar. There are messages from just last week. Mom shot back. I must have made a noise because suddenly, the argument stopped. The door opened and Dad stood there, pale as he saw me. Meredith, honey. I didn't let him finish. I ran out of the house, down the street, not stopping until I reached the park. I collapsed onto a swing, sobbing. Hours later, Dad found me. Meredith, we need to talk, he said gently. How could you? I shouted. How could you do this to Mom? To us? Dad sighed heavily. I made a terrible mistake, but your mother and we're working through it for the family. For Sophie, can you please keep this between us? I wanted to scream and tell Mom everything, but the thought of our family falling apart was too much. So I nodded, even though it broke my heart. The next few years were a blur. I threw myself into my studies, doing anything to avoid being home. The weight of Dad's secret crushed me, especially when I looked at Mom. My only escape was Miss Patterson, my guidance counselor. She noticed how withdrawn I was and how intensely I focused on school. Meredith, is everything okay at home? She asked one day. I almost broke down but couldn't betray my family. Just stressed about college applications, I lied. Miss Patterson didn't seem to believe me, but she didn't push. Instead, she became my mentor and helped me channel my pain into ambition. Before I knew it, graduation day arrived. As valedictorian, I stood at the podium, looking out at my classmates. Life doesn't always go as planned, I began. Sometimes we face challenges that seem impossible. But in those moments, we find our true strength. I saw Mom dabbing at her eyes, Dad looking proud but still guilty, and Sophie in her wheelchair, clapping excitedly even though she didn't understand why. Perseverance isn't just about pushing through hard times. It's about finding hope in the darkest moments and believing in yourself. When no one else does, I said, my voice cracking slightly, but I continued. We've all faced obstacles, some visible, some hidden, but we're here today because we refuse to let those obstacles define us. As I finished my speech to loud applause, I locked eyes with Miss Patterson. She nodded with a knowing look. I had made it this far, carrying the weight of my family's secrets. But as I stepped off the stage, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of my journey. Fast forward 10 years, and I'm still carrying the weight of those family secrets. On the outside, my life looks perfect. Corner office, fancy title, everything I worked for. But my personal life, it's a mess. Meredith, we've been dating for a year. Don't you think it's time I met your family? Tom asks over dinner. I nearly choke on my wine. It's complicated, Tom. My sister. She needs a lot of care, and I trail off. And you've used that excuse every time, he says, sighing. What aren't you telling me? If only he knew. But how do you explain to the man you love that your family is a ticking time bomb? The next day, my mom calls, sounding frantic. Meredith, Sophie's care facility is raising their rates. We can't afford it. I rub my temples, feeling a headache coming on. How much, Mom? When she tells me the amount, my stomach drops. It's more than I can comfortably afford, but what choice do I have? I'll figure something out, I promise. But that's just the start. A week later, Mom shows up at my apartment, tears streaming down her face. I found emails, she sobs. Robert's affair, it wasn't just a fling. It went on for years, Meredith. Years. The guilt of keeping Dad's secret for so long overwhelms me. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have told you. Her eyes widen in shock. You knew? Before I can explain, my phone rings. It's Dad. Meredith, I need your help. The company's being sued. They're saying I falsified reports, but it's not true. You have to believe me. But I don't. Not anymore. Overwhelmed, I reach out to the one person who's always been there for me, Miss Patterson. During our coffee meetup, I confess, I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm betraying someone no matter what. Miss Patterson listens patiently, then leans forward. Meredith, you're not responsible for your father's actions. But you do have a choice in how you respond to them. Together, we come up with a plan. We'll anonymously tip off the authorities about Dad's business practices. It's not much, but it's a start. Just when I think things can't get any worse, Tom calls. You won't believe who I just saw at the school. A woman named Jessica was asking about you, Tom said over the phone. She said she knew your father. My blood ran cold. Jessica, Dad's former secretary. What was she doing back in town? I rushed to confront Dad, only to overhear him on the phone. Jessica, please, you can't do this. I'll lose everything, he begged. Then leave Linda. Jessica's voice crackled through the speaker, or I'll tell her everything. Dad's face fell. I need time, just give me a few days. As he hung up, he saw me standing in the doorway. The look of desperation in his eyes told me everything. Dad, what have you done? I asked. He broke down, confessing to a web of lies and financial wrongdoing that made my head spin. The father I thought I knew was a stranger to me. As I walked out of his office, I made a decision. It was time to stop protecting him. The truth had to come out. Little did I know, the storm that was about to hit would change everything. The day it all fell apart started like any other. I was at work when my phone exploded with notifications. Dad's company was under investigation by the SEC. My stomach churned, knowing what was coming. I rushed home to chaos. Mom was screaming at Dad, years of anger finally pouring out. You ruined our family. You chose your mistress over us, she shouted. Linda, please, I can explain, Dad tried. Sophie's caregiver, Maria, tried to step in. Please, Mr. Anderson, you're scaring Sophie. Stay out of this, Dad snapped, raising his hand. Maria flinched. That was the last straw. Maria reported Dad for verbal abuse, and everything began to unravel. Within weeks, Dad was forced to resign from his company. The scandal hit the local news, and then came the final blow. Jessica, realizing her benefits were gone, went public with the affair. Mom filed for divorce faster than I could blink. Through it all, I felt torn. Part of me felt vindicated, but another part felt guilty. Had I caused all of this by tipping off Miss Patterson? I finally broke down and told Tom everything. Mar, you did the right thing, he reassured me, holding me close. Your dad made his own choices. You're not responsible for his actions. His words were a comfort, easing the guilt I had carried. A year later, we were having a family dinner. Mom, Sophie, Tom, and me. The atmosphere was lighter. Mom was glowing. The support group is amazing, she said. I'm helping other parents navigate the challenges we face with Sophie. I smiled, watching Sophie happily munching on her favorite snack. She was thriving in her new care facility. Everything finally felt like it was falling into place. I have some news, I began. I have some news, I announced. Tom squeezed my hand, giving me encouragement. We're engaged. Mom's squeal of delight was deafening, and even Sophie clapped, sensing the excitement. Oh, and I got that promotion at work, I added as an afterthought. As we celebrated, my phone buzzed. It was Dad. Meredith, please, can we talk? I want to make things right. I stepped outside to take the call. Dad, I'm glad you're getting help, but I can't just forget everything that happened. I understand. I miss you, Pumpkin, he said, using my old nickname, which brought a lump to my throat. I hope you find peace, Dad, but right now, I need to focus on healing and on the family that's always been there for me. I ended the call, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Back inside, Mom was telling a story, gesturing excitedly while Sophie giggled, a sound so pure that it brought tears to my eyes. Tom looked at me with love and understanding. For the first time in years, I felt hope. We'd been through so much, but we had come out stronger. As I joined in the laughter, I realized this is what family should feel like. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still challenges and wounds to heal, but looking at the faces around the table, I knew we'd face them together. And that was enough. Now, to answer your question, if I were in Meredith's shoes, it would be difficult to decide whether to expose my father's misdeeds earlier or keep them secret to protect the family. The decision between loyalty and justice is never easy. Sometimes protecting family means confronting the truth, even if it causes pain. In the long run, honesty may be the only path to healing. What do you think is the right choice? Would you expose the truth or keep it hidden for the sake of family?
I'm sorry, but I've decided to marry Mike. My sister Anne's words over the phone left me speechless. Marry Mike? Mike is my husband. What the hell is she thinking? I was shocked when Anne called me before, saying she was having an affair with Mike. She had asked me to break up with him then, but I never heard about them getting married. I bit my lip. How are you going to marry Mike? Ask him when he gets home today. He said he's divorcing you to marry me. She was relentless, saying her piece and then laughing as she hung up. I was anxious and couldn't sit still until Mike came home from work. He seemed fed up with me, but divorce? What am I supposed to do? My name is Sarah. I'm 40 years old and I work at a clothing store. I have a son and a daughter, but no husband. I got married at 30 and divorced at 35. Let me explain how I ended up marrying and then divorcing my ex-husband, Mike. I met Mike when I was 29. He came into the clothing store where I worked. My store sells both men's and women's clothing, so we get a fair amount of male customers. It was a Sunday afternoon when I saw Mike struggling to pick out clothes and decided to help him. Are you looking for something? Yes. I want to try dressing up for a change. Mike shyly admitted he wasn't used to picking out stylish clothes. He usually bought affordable clothes randomly and didn't know what would look good. I started picking out clothes that would suit Mike's handsome face. As I selected pieces, I could see his expression brighten. This outfit is nice. I'll take it. Thank you. I couldn't help but respond cheerfully, making him smile. I felt embarrassed, but thrilled that he chose the clothes I picked out. I couldn't hide my happiness as I rang up his purchase. After that, he came to my store frequently. As a regular customer, our conversations became lively, and we talked about our hobbies beyond clothes. One day, he handed me a note. When I got home, I saw it was his contact number. I thought long and hard about the store employee-customer relationship before calling him. "Hello? Mike?" I spoke nervously, and I heard his familiar voice on the other end. "Yes. I'm glad you called. I was half giving up hope." He sounded delighted, his voice higher than usual. We chatted as acquaintances, not as employee and customer. I learned he was 3 years older than me and worked as a salesperson at a well-known brokerage firm. He graduated from a top university, the epitome of an elite career. I wasn't attracted to his status, but as a woman, I was thrilled to meet a serious man like him and exchange contact information. It might sound exaggerated, but I truly felt this was the happiest moment of my life. "Would you like to go on a date sometime?" "I'd love to." Mike asked me out, and I readily agreed. After a few dates, he confessed his feelings, and we started dating. We clicked from the beginning, sharing the same pace in conversation and similar interests. A year passed, and our relationship continued strong. There was never any doubt about our love for each other, and we decided to get married. I had just turned 30, and it felt like the perfect milestone to get married. Mike was also at an ideal age for marriage, so our parents quickly approved of our union. Thus, we decided to marry after 1 year of dating. Once married, I promptly shared the news with everyone around me. Everyone was happy for us, but I remember feeling embarrassed when my colleagues teased me about meeting him at my store. I was too happy to care much. With the family meetings behind us, we moved into the rental apartment we had leased together and began our married life. In the beginning, our married life was smooth. Mike often came home late because of his job, so I handled most of the household chores. The only thing he did was take out the trash, but my job was mostly shift-based, so I often finished work on time. It felt wrong to ask Mike, who worked 2 to 3 hours of overtime daily, to help more with the chores. "I'm sorry for making you do all the housework, Sarah. It can't be helped. Besides, I like taking care of the house." At first, he seemed to feel guilty about not being able to participate in the chores. It was enough that he felt sorry. I respected his feelings and worked hard to balance my job and the housework. However, things began to change after a year. I got promoted from a regular employee to a store manager. With the promotion came additional responsibilities that had to be handled after regular hours. The higher salary was part of the deal. As a manager, I was determined to create a pleasant work environment for the other staff. As work got busier, I started to neglect household duties. "We've been eating the same meals a lot lately." One evening, while eating stew for dinner, Mike commented, "I'm sorry." He was right. Since work had become busier, I had been making dishes like stew or pot au feu that I could prepare in bulk and keep for a few days. It was understandable that he was frustrated with the almost college student-like diet. However, I was too exhausted from work to accept his criticism. I was doing my best to manage the housework despite being busy. If he had complaints about my cooking, he could cook for himself. I almost retorted but ended up just apologizing. From that day, Mike's attitude began to change gradually, which was foreseeable. The next day, when I served the same stew, he visibly grimaced. I felt bad, knowing it was the same as the previous day, but there was still stew left. Even if I told him that I hated eating the same meals every day too, he glanced at me as if to say, "So what?" I felt an urge to run away from the situation. We both worked hard every day. But since becoming a manager, I couldn't shake the sense of inequality between us. Our relationship began to deteriorate after just a year of marriage, but in that first year, I became pregnant with Mike's child. When I told him about the pregnancy, he responded with, "Oh, I see." He didn't seem very happy. Though I was puzzled, I convinced myself he just hadn't yet felt the reality of becoming a father. About 8 months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. We named our son Sam. I took time off work to focus on caring for Sam and managing the house. Before taking maternity leave, I had assumed that work was more challenging than childcare, but reality proved otherwise. Every night was spent waking up every 1 or 2 hours for feedings. I struggled with diaper changes and preparing formula. Sam would cry endlessly for reasons I couldn't understand. I had almost no personal time and was left alone to manage the unfamiliar tasks of childcare while he remained indifferent. Even when I was overwhelmed by the challenges of my first-time parenting, he never offered to help. He acted as if it had nothing to do with him, completely ignoring my struggles. When he came home from work, he exaggerated his fatigue and quickly retreated to the bedroom. Even if he couldn't participate in the childcare, I wished he would at least acknowledge my efforts. I wondered if I was being selfish for feeling this way. However, he was responsible with finances, contributing to our child's future by getting a college savings plan and covering medical checkup expenses. When I wanted to go to the salon, he even hired a helper to give me some free time. While he didn't engage directly in childcare, he wasn't entirely uncooperative. I always questioned his inconsistent behavior. 2 years into my lonely journey of childcare, I gave birth to our second child, a baby girl named Karen. This time around, I managed the challenges more calmly than with my first child. However, taking care of 2 young children alone still required immense patience, especially since our eldest was only 2 years old. By this time, our conversations had dwindled. Mike started working even longer hours, often coming home after I was already asleep. Our lives were completely out of sync. I couldn't help but feel lonely, despite accepting it as the way things were. Yet, I was still happy back then, unaware of what he was really doing after work. Our son, Sam, turned 4, and Karen was now 2. I had returned to work when I was 35, putting both children in a daycare center. Though I was no longer a manager, I accepted my role as a regular employee, as managing a store while raising 2 small children seemed impossible. Therefore, I tried to think that I was fully satisfied with my position as an ordinary employee at work. Then, everything changed that summer. One evening, after picking up the kids from daycare and starting dinner, my rarely used smartphone rang. Seeing Anne's name on the screen surprised me. And, my older sister by 3 years, was a busy stage actress and seldom called. We were never close. And was beautiful, popular with both men and women, while I was plain and reserved. Our parents and friends often compared us, and I was jealous of how everyone adored Anne. Naturally, I never tried to get closer to her. Even as adults, I believed we lived in different worlds. So, her call was shocking. What could she want now? Thinking it might be a mistake, I answered anyway, out of sisterly duty. "Hello?" "Finally, you picked up, Sarah." Anne's high-pitched voice wasn't one I wanted to hear for long. "What's up?" I could hear her take a deep breath on the other end. "Well, I'm dating your husband, Mike. So, I'd like you to leave him." "What?" The sudden revelation made me almost drop the knife I was holding. "Didn't you hear me? I said, leave him." "What do you mean?" And casually admitted to the affair and asked me to leave my husband. I was too shocked to respond, frozen in place. Fortunately, the kids were asleep after returning from daycare, sparing them from seeing my distressed face. It's exactly what it sounds like. I've been seeing Mike for a long time. A long time? Since when? Well, since before your son was born, so about 4 years. I felt dizzy at the length of time. Sam was born about a year after we got married. How could Mike, who used to be so serious, have started an affair with and at such a time? Mike said he started noticing me during the family meeting. At first, he tried to ignore it because I was his fiance's sister. But then we ran into each other in town. I asked him if he wanted to grab a coffee, and he immediately agreed. After that, it was really easy. He fell for my charms. We went on a few dates after work and then started seeing each other. I felt nauseous hearing Anne's truth. I couldn't believe that serious him had so easily had an affair with someone like Anne. But thinking back to how he barely talked to me at home, and wasn't very involved in housework or childcare, things started to make sense. A surge of anger rose up against her. She was definitely the one to blame. She had seduced my husband and made him fall for her. She had always been popular with men, so even making my husband like her was probably easy for her. And could do that. Unlike me. How could you do something so horrible? I asked, my voice shaking. She didn't seem to show any guilt, and it was really getting on my nerves. I just laid out the bait. It was Mike who took it. If he really cared about Sarah, my bait would have seemed like trash. But to Mike, it looked like a feast. She laughed crudely, making me want to punish her right then and there. But since we were only connected by phone, I had no way to confront her physically, only with words. And was much more eloquent than me. So, hurry up and leave him. Clinging to him is pointless. Mike is completely in love with me. And hung up before I could say anything to stop her, leaving behind her cruel words. I was shaken all day. I had never once considered that Mike might be cheating. And with and, of all people. That night, I confronted Mike when he got home late. Mike, is it true you're having an affair with Anne? It took a lot of courage to ask. Mike visibly flinched at the unexpected question. How did you find out? Instead of denying it, he confirmed it. I stared at him in disbelief. And called today. She said she's having an affair with you and wants me to leave you. Mike remained silent, unable to say anything, as if he had no words left. I had hoped he would deny it or at least get upset. Mike and Anne really were having an affair. The fact was crushing me. From then on, every day was chillingly cold at home. Only the children, unaware of anything, continued to play happily as usual. Mike barely interacted with the kids, so I vowed to stay strong and act normally around them. A month after our marriage started falling apart, and called me again. Hello? What do you want this time? Sarah, don't be so harsh. Have you thought about what we discussed last time? Anne's high-pitched voice sounds like she's done nothing wrong. What do you mean, last time? You know, I asked you to break up with Mike. I can't help but get angry at her words. How long is she going to keep treating me like an idiot? I was about to snap back when she made a shocking statement. Sorry, but I decided to marry Mike. I was speechless at her words over the phone. Marry Mike? Mike is my husband. What the hell is she thinking? I was surprised when Anne called me before, saying she was having an affair with Mike. She had asked me to break up with him then too, but I hadn't heard anything about them getting married. I bit my lip. How could you marry him? Ask him when he gets home today. He said he wants to divorce you and marry me. And said this firmly, then laughed and hung up the phone. I was anxious and couldn't stay calm until Mike came home from work. Sure, he seemed fed up with me, but divorce? What should I do? That day, I couldn't focus on work at all and went home in a daze, putting the kids to bed. When Mike got home around midnight, I asked him what Ann had said. "Are you planning to marry Ann?" Honestly, I thought Mike wasn't serious about Ann. I thought he was just being tempted and played by her. But Mike, yes, nodded awkwardly. "What?" I felt the blood drain from my face. He really wants to marry her? I stared at him in disbelief. "I was going to tell you today. Sarah, please, let's divorce. I want to marry Ann." With that, Mike took a divorce application form out of his work bag. His section was already filled out. Looking at the form, I felt like crying. Mike was never a man of many words. He hardly ever helped with housework or childcare. Even so, I thought he was working hard for our family. Mike's determination seemed unshakable. His expression indicated that he wouldn't be moved by anything I said. "You're the worst." I couldn't help but feel my trust in Mike shatter as I reluctantly accepted the divorce papers. For a moment, Mike looked relieved. I wanted to lash out at him right then, but I held back for the sake of the children, who might wake up. And so, our 5-year marriage came to an end. The only thing I worried about after divorcing Mike was our children. I absolutely did not want to be separated from them. I insisted on this point. In the end, I was granted custody of the children, which brought me some relief. It was also agreed that Mike would send child support every month. Of course, I received a substantial compensation from both Mike and Ann. Despite this, the two of them remained unperturbed and went on to remarry. I had no idea where to direct my frustration. After that, life became really tough. Even though I received child support, I had to support the household entirely on my own. I realized how much Mike had financially supported us until now. I worked part-time at a clothing store and did as much freelance work as I could at home. Even then, it was all I could do to make ends meet, and there was no way I could take the children on vacations or do fun activities. I felt sorry for the children, but seeing their smiles when we played at the local park made me determined to work even harder for them. As I desperately worked, 5 years flew by. One Sunday afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number on my smartphone. Who could it be? I wondered as I answered the call, thinking it might be a wrong number or a sales call. Hello? Sarah? The faintly familiar voice made me search my memory for someone I knew. I realized it was Mary, Mike's mother, who I had not seen since my divorce from Mike 5 years ago. Mary? I asked cautiously, not wanting to embarrass myself if I was wrong. Yes, it's me. I'm sorry to call you out of the blue. She knew that Mike had cheated on me, leading to our divorce. So, she probably felt a sense of guilt towards me. She had always been a timid person, but now her voice sounded even more frail than usual. Is there something you need? Getting a call from Mary now made me feel uneasy. Yes. I'll be straightforward. My son, Mike, passed away from terminal cancer yesterday. What? I couldn't believe the words I was hearing. Mike passed away from terminal cancer? It was hard to believe. When he was living with me, he never seemed to have any health issues. I'm sorry to shock you. We are still struggling to accept it ourselves. He was only 43. It was liver cancer, and by the time it was discovered, it was already terminal. I felt a mix of emotions. Mike had betrayed me and married Ann. There was no room for forgiveness for that. Even though he was dead, it didn't change the fact that he had wronged me. Still, I couldn't help but feel shaken by the news of his death. He wrote a will, and he mentioned you in it. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you come see us? I'd like you to hear his final wishes. All right. I was surprised to hear that Mike had mentioned me in his will. We had barely communicated since our divorce. Why would he mention me now? Despite my apprehension, I decided to follow Mary's request. A week later, after Mike's funeral, his relatives gathered together. I left the children with my parents and headed to the place Mary had specified. It's been a while, Sarah. Seeing Anne, I didn't know how to respond, so I ignored her. And looked a little haggard, her once beautiful face now appearing exhausted and worn out. Her sharp personality added a hint of intimidation to her presence. Even with Mike gone, I felt not an ounce of sympathy for Anne. I would never forgive her for stealing Mike away from me, not in this lifetime. Finally, the executor opened the will and began reading its contents aloud. The entire family watched quietly, waiting with bated breath. You see, after marrying Anne, Mike had been promoted to a company executive position. Naturally, his salary must have skyrocketed as a result. Furthermore, during our marriage, he had acquired numerous assets, including real estate properties. We divided them during the divorce, but there should still be a substantial amount remaining. I wasn't sure how much the relatives knew about this, but Anne was certainly aware of Mike's wealth. She even seemed to be eagerly anticipating how much of the assets would be left to her. The executor read through the will's contents in order. That's when we were hit with a shocking revelation. Incredibly, it stated that all the assets were to be given to me, while all the liabilities were to be transferred to Anne. Of course, considering the legal portion, the part about giving me everything meant that Anne, as his wife, would also receive a share. However, as a childless couple, Anne had expected to inherit the entire estate, so she became visibly agitated and furious. Wait a minute. What's the meaning of this? Why are the liabilities going to me? And why is Sarah, who's supposed to be divorced, receiving assets? Sarah, were you secretly involved with Mike? Anne screamed, her hair disheveled as she lunged forward, grabbing my collar. I don't know. I barely saw Mike after our divorce. I had forgotten about him until I was summoned here today. What? That can't be true. Then why are you being favored in the will? That's... Honestly, I was just as perplexed. Why on earth would Mike leave me, a non-heir? A portion of his estate in his will? I was utterly confused by this unexpected turn of events. At that moment, Mary stepped forward, holding an envelope in her hand. The will was in the possession of the court-appointed executor, so this appeared to be something else entirely. And the answer to your question is written in this letter, Mary announced in a clear voice. And turned to face Mary, a look of surprise on her face. What do you mean? You see, this letter was written by Mike while he was in the hospital and handed to me before he passed. Unlike the will, it simply expresses Mike's thoughts and feelings. But the contents were so important that I decided to reveal this letter if anything happened. I'll read it now. Mary opened the letter Mike had allegedly written and began reading its contents. This is what it said. Ever since he started complaining about feeling unwell, and had inexplicably begun feeding him only heavily flavored foods. Dishes that were clearly high in salt, sugar, and syrup. Moreover, she started making a lot of fried foods, which she had never done before, claiming they were too much of a hassle to clean up afterward. When he pointed this out to her, "I'm just in the mood for strong flavors," she would dismissively say. Finding it suspicious, one night he pretended to be asleep and overheard and talking on the phone with someone outside his room. The content of, "His illness will worsen soon. Then I'll share some of the inheritance with you." The conversation was appalling. It became clear that Anne was trying to push him to his limits. That's why he decided not to leave her any assets. Instead, he wanted to bequeath them to Sarah. The truth was, during his marriage to Sarah, he was so busy with work that he hardly had time for family matters. I truly loved Sarah and the kids, but I was too awkward and couldn't do anything for them. Please forgive me. I'm ashamed of my weakness of heart that led me to cheat. I hope you can find happiness with the children from now on. The atmosphere in the room changed dramatically when Mary read Mike's letter aloud. Is it true that and drove Mike to the edge? Isn't that going a bit too far? The relatives glared at Anne. I was dumbfounded by the unexpected contents of the letter. But I couldn't help but be moved by the fact that Mike loved me and the children. Mike. I'm the one who should be sorry. I regretted not being there for Mike when he was having a hard time at work. Mary rubbed my back. I couldn't stop crying. What's with this letter? Saying I drove Mike to the edge? Ridiculous. This letter must be a fake. And insisted that she was not guilty. But Mary went up to Anne and said, It's not fake. This handwriting is definitely Mike's. You committed a crime and don't even reflect on it. You have no right to receive Mike's assets. Leave this place right now. She scolded Anne. With a terrifying expression on her face, I trembled as I listened beside her. What? It's useless to say anything to this family. Fine. I'm never coming back to this house again. Don't ever appear in front of me again either. I shouted on impulse. I'm tired of a life manipulated by Anne. I will firmly accept Mike's wishes and find happiness with the children. And left us, raving mad. Mary, thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't do anything for you when I heard Sarah and Mike were getting divorced. Please be happy with your grandchildren. I'm really glad Mary is such a good person. I took Mike's feelings to heart and went home. Since then, Anne has been saddled with a huge debt due to the negative assets Mike left her, and it seems Anne, who was a Broadway actress, stopped getting work after marrying Mike, perhaps due to aging. Having lost her job as a Broadway actress, and had no choice but to depend on Mike financially. Still, Mike worked hard for his wife, but at first he probably never imagined that Anne was making meals that would make him sick in order to get his inheritance. Mike had become a company executive, and even without targeting an inheritance, he should have been able to live a relatively affluent life if he lived normally. Nevertheless, the fact that she was after his inheritance means that Anne had no love for Mike. From the beginning, she seduced him for his money and tried to get the inheritance by making me and Mike divorce. I was horrified by her ugly thoughts. But even her is now living a hellish life every day. Because the man Anne was cheating with and trying to steal the inheritance with was caught for another fraud scheme. Naturally, because Anne's existence was also revealed, she ended up being sent to the FBI. She also has the crime of trying to take Mike's life, so she probably won't be able to move from the FBI for a while. Even if she's sent to prison and gets out, what awaits her is repayment of the debts Mike saddled her with. I didn't feel the slightest bit sorry for Anne's bleak future ahead. I want her to reflect properly. And I sincerely hope she never makes the same mistake again. Meanwhile, with the assets passed on from Mike, the kids and I went on our first trip to Hawaii. Seeing them both looking so happy makes me feel blissful. During our marriage, he seemed awkward and at a loss with how to interact with the kids, but now I know he truly loved them. From now on, I want to spend happy days with the children while being grateful to Mike, who left me such precious treasures. Hey, where are you now? The wedding is about to start. I raised my voice to my husband Robert through the smartphone. Today is our beloved daughter, Rebecca's wedding day. Next to me stands Rebecca, clad in a pure white wedding dress. It's almost time for the guests to arrive, yet Robert, our son Daniel, my mother-in-law Samantha, and father-in-law Justin are not here. So, I had the phone on speaker, intending to ask Robert when he, along with Rebecca, would arrive at the venue. Just yesterday, a flight got cancelled, and I managed to get a really cheap ticket to Florida. Robert's cheery words left me stunned. Does he have any idea how many hundreds of miles away Florida is? And the wedding is about to begin. It's Rebecca's wedding, no less. The in-laws have always prioritized the eldest son, indulging Daniel limitlessly while treating Rebecca somewhat dismissively. So, I had suspected they might not be too enthusiastic about attending today's wedding. But this is beyond what I could have imagined. This is beyond discussion. I'm at a loss for words. Disbelief. Disappointment. Emptiness. A myriad of emotions come and go. Okay. Have fun then. With just those words, I ended the call. What a thing to do on the day we celebrate Rebecca's wedding. How pitiful Robert and Daniel, as her father and brother, are. However, Rebecca smiles in her beautiful dress. Mom, we're going to start the wedding as planned. Rebecca smiles in her beautiful dress. It's okay. It's not like I didn't expect this. Leave it to me. I am Emily, a 50-year-old office worker. I live with my husband Robert of the same age, our 24-year-old son Daniel, and 23-year-old daughter Rebecca. Everyone in the family works and leads a busy life. My parents' house is about an hour's drive away, but Robert's parents live just a few minutes away on foot. When we got married, Robert argued that it would be easier to get help raising children if we lived closer to one set of parents, so we decided to buy a house here. In fact, Robert had initially proposed living together as if it were a given, but I opposed, and that's how we ended up with our current arrangement. I had no intention of quitting my job, and indeed, balancing work and home life would be challenging, but living with the in-laws would mean our family's own space wouldn't be secured. Frankly, the in-laws' place felt like Samantha's castle, a housewife's domain, and I knew living there would be fraught with difficulty. Justin and Samantha hold somewhat outdated views, believing that a woman should become a housewife upon marriage and that the eldest son is to be prioritized above all. So when I married Robert and chose not to quit my job, I frequently received snide remarks, and they repeatedly pressured me to give birth to a boy. I was relieved from the bottom of my heart that we didn't end up living together. About 6 months into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant, and when it was revealed that the baby was a boy, the joy of Justin, Samantha, and Robert was immense. Moreover, Samantha cheerfully offered, "Emily, you have work, right? Don't worry, I'll take care of the baby." Samantha cheerfully offered. Despite having made countless snide remarks about my continuing to work post-marriage, her attitude changed unbelievably. Indeed, after giving birth, Samantha visited our home nearly every day. Her persistent zeal in looking after Daniel, staying for long hours, meant I couldn't relax, barely slept, and lived in constant discomfort. Even when Samantha came over, she focused solely on Daniel, barely doing any housework, which left me, fresh postpartum, to handle everything. I often thought it would be easier to be alone with the baby from the start, but confronting Samantha directly to tell her she was a nuisance was daunting, leaving me to continue my days in dissatisfaction. Because of this lifestyle, my breast milk dried up prematurely. Clearly, sleep deprivation and stress were to blame. At first, I was devastated. Breastfeeding was a happy time for me, an important moment of bonding with the baby without Samantha's interference. However, I decided to look on the bright side. After all, one of the worries about leaving the child is that they might not accept anything but breast milk. Before Daniel was born, it was already agreed that Samantha would look after him, and I thought it would be easier to go to work than having her come over every day. So, taking advantage of the situation, I returned to my job 2 months postpartum. As a working parent, I was grateful for the childcare. Looking for a daycare center is hard, and the fees are no joke. But here, just a stone's throw away, I could leave him for practically a thank you note. This was clearly a great arrangement. So, I gratefully entrusted Daniel to them, but gradually, I began to feel uneasy. Daniel would spend all day at my in-laws, only coming home to sleep. When I went to pick him up after work, "It's still fine, isn't it?" They wouldn't let him go, which was expected, and even on my days off, they'd come over and take Daniel away. "I'm watching him, Emily. You rest." Samantha's attachment to Daniel was obvious, as if she was trying to take him away from me. And it wasn't just my imagination, as I realized after giving birth to Rebecca, who is 1 year younger than Daniel. Once Rebecca was born and I went back to work, both children were left at my in-laws, but it was clear they were treated differently. Samantha was always with Daniel, barely paying any attention to Rebecca, who was just left lying in her crib. When I came to pick them up, she wouldn't let go of Daniel, but with Rebecca, "Why don't you take her home?" she'd say. Even if Rebecca cried, she wouldn't try to soothe her, prioritizing Daniel's play with toys instead. This disparity couldn't just be because Daniel could talk or because Rebecca was still an infant. My in-laws and Robert spoil Daniel, calling him the precious heir endlessly. As for my daughter Rebecca, they're practically indifferent, treating her like heir, and when they do talk to her, it's only to tell her to follow Daniel's lead. Whenever the siblings fight, Rebecca is the one who gets scolded, regardless of the reason or cause. Daniel always comes first. If he wants something of Rebecca's, my in-laws take it from her to give to him. They revered Daniel, the eldest son, like a religion, forcing Rebecca to be subservient and sacrificial. This has been the case since they were young and hasn't changed as they've grown. Of course, I thought this way of raising them was wrong, so I've repeatedly tried to discuss it with Robert. I wanted them to treat both children equally, and to convey that to my in-laws. But Robert wouldn't listen. Instead, he'd say, "Daniel is the eldest son, so it's only natural." Being an only child and the eldest son himself, Robert was raised to believe he was king, thinking such treatment is normal. He believes the eldest son should be favored in everything and that it's natural for women to follow men, so there's nothing wrong with Daniel being prioritized in every way. No matter how much I explained, he couldn't understand, and I was shocked by his insistence and the lack of doubt in his beliefs. I thought Robert was confident and reliable, someone who valued his parents, which is why I decided to marry him. But it turned out that his confidence wasn't backed by effort but by unfounded pride, making him just a mama's boy. I regret not realizing this immaturity in myself before getting married. Knowing this couldn't continue, I tried to separate Daniel and Rebecca from my in-laws. I told them it was fine because the childcare center could look after them until I finished work, and I actually enrolled them. But because Samantha wanted to pick them up, Robert contacted the childcare center without my knowledge, allowing Samantha to take the children home while I was at work. Moreover, she tried to take only Daniel back, leaving Rebecca at the childcare center, causing trouble with the center and leading to us being asked to refrain from using their services, saying, "If you have someone else to take care of them, please don't use the childcare center." The same happened with the after-school care at the elementary school. Ultimately, we couldn't use it because Samantha insisted on taking care of Daniel. However, I had hoped that as they got older, they'd be able to stay home alone and wouldn't need to go to my in-laws anymore. My in-laws kept spoiling Daniel to keep him close. They would lure him with sweet words and things he wanted, making me and Rebecca out to be the bad guys, instilling in Daniel that his allies were my in-laws and Robert. Growing up in such an environment, Daniel was heavily influenced by my in-laws and Robert. He would demand anything he wanted from them, and they would comply, while increasingly looking down on me and Rebecca. His demands towards us were in a commanding tone. If his requests were not met, he would throw tantrums. If I refused Daniel's demands or scolded him, he would immediately seek help from Robert or my in-laws. Eventually, Daniel grew up without much job hunting effort and entered the same company as Robert, thanks to Robert's arrangement. Robert proudly said he had personally asked the president, but I was worried whether Daniel could fulfill his job responsibilities properly. In stark contrast, Rebecca thoroughly researched her industry, visited various companies, and eventually received an offer from a company where she could do the job she wanted. Interestingly, my in-laws only gave a brand-name suit and shoes to Daniel as a graduation gift. Nothing for Rebecca. Not even a congratulations. Having seen how hard Rebecca worked, I sincerely told her well done and congratulations. Then we celebrated by eating something delicious, and bought her a commuting bag. I thought her efforts and their results deserved praise. By this point, Rebecca was used to the disparity from my in-laws and seemed not to care, but as a parent, it was still hard to accept that my children were being treated so differently. A few years after Rebecca became a working adult, it was decided she would marry her colleague, William. William seemed like a kind person who would cherish Rebecca, and her smile was serene when they looked at each other, assuring me they would build a happy family. The young couple had carefully planned their wedding, choosing a venue within their budget that met their desires. As their parent, I barely needed to be involved, only asking if there was anything I could help with. Interestingly, Robert, Daniel, and my in-laws seemed to have little interest in Rebecca's wedding. I don't know the details since Rebecca handled the invitations, but from her saying, "I've invited them," without further comments, I could guess it was the usual attitude. It's pitiful that they show so little interest in the wedding of a beloved daughter. Lately, I've been thinking I should have divorced sooner. Divorce is said to be difficult, and I couldn't bring myself to make a significant change, but their attitude is disrespectful to Rebecca and William. I'll support Rebecca as much as possible so she can start her new life happily. On the day of Rebecca's wedding, the venue was an exclusive one that limited to one couple per day. Although the ceremony was in the afternoon, the bride and groom had to prepare from the morning, so I was in charge of welcoming guests, making arrangements, and greeting friends who helped. As the mother of the bride, it was natural. I wanted to do at least this much since the two had prepared everything themselves so far. Although I arrived early to get ready, being able to understand the venue and see Rebecca in her beautiful dress first were perks I enjoyed. As I was busily yet joyfully preparing, Robert, Daniel, and my in-laws had not shown up. Even when it was almost time to receive guests. They had no specific roles, so it was fine for them to arrive with the other guests, but as family, I had hoped at least Robert and Daniel would be on the welcoming side. "Mom!" Rebecca, dressed in her wedding gown, approached me in the dressing room area. "Have Dad and the others arrived?" "They haven't." "Should I call them?" "I need to go and welcome the guests soon." It's frustrating that on a day like this, they can't even act like proper parents. I take out my smartphone and call Robert. I put it on speaker so Rebecca can hear as well. The phone rings. A sense of relief washes over me that the call goes through. "Hello? Where are you right now?" "The ceremony is about to start." "In Florida, why?" "What?" What did he just say? Florida? "Just yesterday, a flight got canceled, and I managed to get a really cheap ticket, so we're in Florida," Robert says cheerfully. "Yesterday? Today is Rebecca's wedding." "Today's Saturday, right?" "We're staying in Florida until Monday, we've taken the day off." "Who's we there?" "My dad, Mom, and Daniel." The Monday off was supposed to be for seeing off William's parents. They live far away and came here for the wedding. We couldn't have a family meeting before the wedding, so we planned to have lunch together afterward to deepen our relationship. "So you knew today was the wedding and still went to Florida?" "Daniel wanted to go since we managed to get the flight." "What else were we supposed to do, right?" "Right, Daniel." Rebecca sighs heavily at her father's words. "Never mind," she murmurs, looking up to the sky. Since I had the speaker on, everyone around could hear the conversation, causing the staff to start murmuring among themselves. If they're in Florida now, there's no way they can make it to the wedding. Rebecca asks a nearby attendant to call the wedding planner, likely to inform them that Robert and the others won't be coming. to cause such inconvenience and stress to the bride right before her wedding. Jealous? We're on a family trip to Florida. Robert's high spirits can be heard, with Daniel laughing in the background. It was clear who Robert's family referred to. Obviously, Rebecca and I weren't included. Something inside me snapped. Okay. Have fun then. With just those words, I end the call. This is beyond discussion. I'm at a loss for words. Disbelief. Disappointment. Emptiness. Various emotions ebb and flow. Mom, let's start the ceremony as planned. Rebecca says. As planned. With the family seats empty. It's okay. It's not like I didn't expect this. Leave it to me. Rebecca smiles in her beautiful dress. I feel sorry, yet incredibly proud. Rebecca is my pride. The ceremony and reception proceed without the bride's brother, father, and paternal grandparents. There were moments when the groom's side and other guests seemed unsettled by their absence, but the couple moved forward with happy smiles. Next, we have a letter from the bride, Rebecca. The lights dim in the venue, focusing a spotlight on Rebecca. Thank you for joining us on our special day. Rebecca begins, her voice clear and strong, holding the letter in her hand. First, I'd like to address the empty seats on my family's side. My father, brother, and paternal grandparents are not present, for which I am deeply sorry. I truly apologize. The room goes silent with her apology. Those close to me know this, but I was not acknowledged by them growing up. I did invite them and received their RSVP, but they went to Florida yesterday. They told me just before the wedding that they'd be there until Monday. The room buzzes with whispers at the revelation. It's an unbelievable situation for many. It's painful to make Rebecca speak of such things at a celebration. However, I saw this as an opportunity to share the truth with you all. After all, it's clear who's out of touch with common sense, right? Rebecca's light-hearted comment brings a soft laughter from the audience. Her adorable demeanor slightly lightens the mood. I'm simply amazed at how Rebecca can express herself so confidently and influence the atmosphere of the venue. Despite growing up close to such a father and grandparents, she never absorbed their negativity and grew into a woman with her own strong core. They always looked down on my mother and me, and we were treated coldly. It hurt when I was younger. But my mother always protected me. Rebecca looks at me. I thought I was protecting her, but now I realize I was the one being protected. Having Rebecca by my side is what kept me going. I've talked a lot, but now I'll read the letter I prepared. I finished writing this letter by yesterday, intending to read it with the family seats filled. Please listen with that in mind. Rebecca opens the letter she's holding. William is standing beside her, looking at Rebecca tenderly, as if to support her. Rebecca's voice fills the room as she begins to read slowly. After expressing her gratitude to the attendees and the joy of getting married, she takes a breath and continues reading. I've written down the thanks I usually can't express. Please listen. Mom, I've always seen how busy you were with work and household chores since I was a child. You've always been there for me, and I never felt lonely. The nutritious and delicious meals you cooked, being able to talk about makeup and fashion, Mom, you're the most reliable and admirable woman I know. Long before I could even remember, my dad's parents and my dad would often say to me, it would have been better if you were born a boy, if you had to be unnecessary, at least be useful to your older brother. But every time, Mom, you'd hug me and say, Rebecca is my treasure. Let's find lots of things you love and enjoy them together. Even though Grandma and Grandpa were harsh to you, you always smiled for me, and I'm truly grateful and admire you for that. Because of all the love you poured into me, no matter how badly my dad's parents, my dad, and my brother treated or said to me, I could always remember joy and kindness. Thank you so much. No matter how many times I say it, it's not enough. I love and appreciate you deeply. From now on, I'll protect you, Mom. I'll return the love you gave me, filled with even more love. The only family I could ever call mine has always been you, Mom. Now that I'm married, my family will grow. Let's enjoy and be happy together, Mom." Rebecca's radiant smile made me tear up. Grateful for how kind she has grown. She expressed her thanks to me, but having Rebecca has been my strength. I hope she finds much happiness with her husband and, someday, their children, expanding the precious family she cherishes. That would be the best way she could return my love. Warm applause filled the room as Rebecca finished reading the letter. The wedding was reaching its climax, with the last task being to see off the guests. The bride and groom, along with their parents, were the first to leave the venue for the farewell. "Mom, how was the letter?" As we found our places following the staff's directions, Rebecca asked me this. I was happy. I've gained another treasure. I packed all my sincerity into it. Thank you. You're welcome. I had planned to read it in front of those who aren't here today. Yes. Rebecca had said that initially. The letter was written assuming Robert and the others would be attending. What would have happened if they truly had been there? I had already told everything to William's parents beforehand. I thought we might cause trouble, and I was planning to read this letter from the start. Through Rebecca and William, his parents smiled at me. It must have been hard. If there's anything we can do, please let us know through Rebecca. Their kind words warmed my heart. I hadn't expected to be understood like this. Busy with work and home, I struggled through suffocating days, focusing solely on protecting Rebecca and not bending to injustice. Never thinking to change the situation or ask for help. Maybe the world is kinder than I thought. Rebecca made me see that. Thank you. I truly am a happy mother. During the farewells, everyone, while leaving, voiced their dissatisfaction and complaints about Robert and my in-laws. Especially Rebecca's friends, who praised her, saying, "You did great." Some even cried. It seems Rebecca had shared her family situation with her close friends, who sympathized with her struggles. They were prepared to back Rebecca up if anything happened during the reception. Surrounded by such wonderful friends, Rebecca is indeed fortunate. And to me, everyone offered comforting words and support. Despite revealing scandalous family dynamics, hardly anyone reacted as if they were handling a hot potato. Everyone was just so kind. Surely, it's Rebecca and William's good nature that has brought these wonderful people together. I'm proud of my Rebecca and thankful for William, a wonderful person. This wedding couldn't have been happier for me. I'm filled with gratitude towards Rebecca. What did you say to Mr. Martinez, my manager? After seeing off Rebecca's in-laws on Monday and parting ways with Rebecca and her family, Robert called my smartphone. As soon as I answered, he blurted out that line. What are you talking about? Why are Daniel and I on house arrest? It seems Robert was angry, but this house arrest couldn't possibly be my fault, so I sighed, expecting another baseless accusation or venting. Well, I had heard some of it from Mr. Martinez. Didn't Mr. Martinez explain the reason? So it was you. You really went and told him unnecessary things. You weren't at Rebecca's wedding, were you? There's nothing to tell. Why did you invite him? He lives nearby and has always been helpful. Mr. Martinez's youngest daughter is friends with Rebecca, so it's not strange at all. The Martinez family, Robert and Daniel's manager, lives in our neighborhood. Robert, who does nothing at home, wouldn't know, but Mr. Martinez and his wife actively participate in community activities like weeding, festivals, and children's events. I often had the chance to talk to them. Above all, it was Rebecca who decided to invite Mr. Martinez and his wife to the wedding. Now I understand, it was to make Mr. Martinez aware of Robert and Daniel's true nature, especially after the letter incident. After the wedding, Mr. Martinez was furious with Robert and Daniel. Not only did he learn about their treatment towards me and Rebecca, but their absence from the wedding and trip to Florida was unacceptable. he said, promising to report it to the company president. Apparently, Robert and Daniel don't have a good reputation within the company. There are rumors of them dismissing women's opinions in meetings or behaving rudely towards female colleagues. But no formal complaints have been filed yet. Where there's smoke, there's fire, but the truth hasn't been revealed. It's possible they've been quashing these issues using their positions. Especially Robert, who could easily intimidate younger employees or use his influence to bury problems. Mr. Martinez realized this might be an issue of their character. Even without a formal position, Daniel's actions could become a serious matter, but Robert has subordinates. For someone in a leadership position to engage in regressive behaviors is intolerable, according to Mr. Martinez. The company president has publicly declared zero tolerance for personal attacks or gender discrimination, so some form of disciplinary action against Robert and Daniel seems likely. What the hell am I supposed to do now? It's your own fault, isn't it? What? Who do you think you're talking to? No one else but you. Where are you now, anyway? I just got off the plane. And now I'm getting calls from Mr. Martinez when I'm just about to head home. From Robert's words, I could tell they'd be home in about an hour. I felt relieved I had packed up and left. Rebecca is moving to her new place, and I'm going back to my parents' house. Back to your parents? I left the divorce papers on the table for you to sign. What? You'll hear from the lawyer later. Please take care. Hey! I hung up without listening to the rest of Robert's words. Rebecca took action, and we were able to expose the misdeeds of her father and my in-laws. I've decided I won't tolerate it any longer. I'm going to live freely and happily from now on. Later, I got a call from Mrs. Martinez and heard the whole story. An internal investigation at the company revealed that Robert and Daniel frequently demeaned women. The company president, upon learning about the wedding incident, stated, "I cannot trust someone who doesn't cherish their family," resulting in Robert and Daniel's demotion and salary reduction. It was entirely their own doing. Right after the sanctions were issued, Robert called me. "You've caused a lot of trouble because of you." Again, he tried to shift the blame and vent his frustration. It was so tiresome and predictable. Didn't you realize it's your own fault? Did you submit the divorce papers? I never said we're getting a divorce. I had expected complaints from Robert. My in-laws and Robert always cared about public image, preferring to hide and lie about unsightly truths. But this time, it was futile. Mrs. Martinez told me that the neighborhood was already buzzing with the story of Rebecca's wedding. "I'll ask the lawyer, and there's no option but divorce for us. You'll also be compensating." Compensation? Why? For the years of mental anguish. I don't have that kind of money. You're working, aren't you? We split the household expenses, with Robert covering the house-related costs and me the daily living expenses. I didn't know how much savings he had, but I assumed he earned enough. After all, we both worked. It turns out he had been squandering any available funds on things like a new car for Daniel, expensive suits, and trips with my in-laws. So, he didn't want a divorce, likely because he was counting on my income. That's ridiculous. Emily, reconsider the divorce, will you? Don't call me by my name, it's creepy. What? I'm definitely getting a divorce. And I'll take the compensation. Be prepared. With that, I ended the call. It took some time, but the divorce was finalized, and I got the compensation. Through the lawyer, we conveyed, "If you don't agree to the divorce, we'll go to court," and quickly reached an agreement for an uncontested divorce. They probably wanted to avoid the social stigma of a drawn-out legal battle. Afterward, Robert and Daniel, feeling unwelcome at the company, eventually resigned. Robert, needing to cover living expenses and compensation, is now juggling part-time jobs. With limited earnings and needing to reduce expenses, he sold the house and moved in with his parents along with Daniel. Pampered and prideful, Daniel retreated from the humiliation and mockery from colleagues and friends, becoming a shut-in, not working at all. The downfall of their precious son and grandson shocked and bedridden my husband's parents. It was entirely their own fault. Meanwhile, Rebecca is expecting, soon to enter her final month of pregnancy. I'm already looking forward to the day my grandchild is born. The baby, a boy, won't be meeting or even knowing about Robert and the others, as Rebecca decided. It's an unavoidable decision. As for me, after initially staying with my parents, I've rented an apartment near my work for independent living. With newfound freedom, I've taken up gym membership and frequently host Rebecca and her husband. I'm leading a fulfilled life, finding joy in each day. My life still holds many more enjoyable moments ahead. Soon as Thomas saw me, he pleaded, "Please, take care of me." Why should I do that? I blurted out reflexively. Who does he think he is asking this? When I was hospitalized with a broken bone. It's a no from me. Ask someone else. And who was it who said that? It's your own responsibility. Be grateful you even got help. This is the end of me reaching out to Thomas. I am Elizabeth, 32 years old. Married 5 years ago, with my husband Thomas, our son Anthony, and our dog Max. We're a family of 3 and 1 pet. Thomas works at a major IT company and is very busy every day. Leaving home early in the morning and often not returning until the date changes isn't uncommon. He frequently works on weekends and takes business trips once a month. Thanks to that, Thomas rarely spends time with the family and has almost no memories of playing with Anthony. However, he has risen rapidly in his career, attaining a managerial position in his 30s. We were able to build my dream house because Thomas worked so hard. My parents are farmers in a rural area. That's why I always longed for a suburban house with a yard. Thanks to Thomas, Anthony and I live comfortably. I've come to terms with our limited family time. To outsiders, we might seem like a blessed family. However, due to my husband's frequent absence, I handle all the childcare and housework alone. It's basically single parenting. I wanted to work and send Anthony to daycare, but Thomas insisted on a preschool that also teaches. So Anthony goes to preschool and I ended up as a housewife. But I have a reassuring friend. My childhood friend Madison. We're the same age and from the same countryside. By coincidence, our kids attend the same preschool. Madison has been a single mother since her divorce last year. After dropping Anthony at preschool, having coffee at my place is my only break. We share our gripes about Thomas and the hardships of parenting. It's when I'm talking to Madison that I realize something. Unknowingly, I've been harboring dissatisfaction towards Thomas. People always say it's wrong to feel dissatisfied in my situation, and I thought so too. But maybe, I was just convincing myself not to be discontent. One day, while walking Max, he suddenly ran off. I chased after Max desperately. A car had stopped in front of me, and while Max managed to avoid it, I wasn't able to stop and ended up hitting the car. It was entirely my fault. Max looked at me worriedly from the sidewalk. I was relieved he was safe, but I couldn't stand up. I was taken to the hospital by ambulance, diagnosed with a bruised shoulder and fractures in my ankle and fibula, and admitted immediately. It seems I'll be hospitalized for about 3 months. I wondered what would happen with Anthony's care. And the house. The worries seemed endless. I called Thomas's mobile phone. I thought he would cooperate at a time like this, but he was continuously unavailable. As I grew anxious, Madison called me. It was to discuss costumes for the preschool play, but I cut the conversation short and asked her to take care of Anthony. Madison was initially surprised and concerned for me, but hearing that I sounded stronger than expected, she gladly agreed to look after Anthony. I was so grateful I almost cried. Next, I phoned Mom to briefly inform her of the accident and my weeks-long hospital stay. She said she'd come as soon as she finished her tasks. Until Mom arrives, Madison would be the only one to rely on. After hanging up with Mom, Thomas finally called. "Sorry, I was too busy to answer the phone." I reported the accident to Thomas and asked him to bring some clothes and essentials. But his response was unbelievable. "No way. Why should I do that? I have to get up early tomorrow, ask someone else." I had expected Thomas to be incredibly worried, but I was the one shocked. Not just because he refused to bring my things, but because he showed no concern at all. I had hoped for Thomas to worry about me and our family. Was I too naive to expect kind words from Thomas? The next day, Madison came to the hospital. She brought my change of clothes and other necessities from home. Madison has a key to my house. And I have one to hers. We always agreed to help each other out in emergencies. I brought extra towels. Let me know if you need anything else. Madison's thoughtfulness made me feel so grateful. After Thomas's behavior yesterday, her kindness was a relief. I couldn't help but tear up. Madison said with a laugh, "You're overreacting," lending me a handkerchief. Madison is the complete opposite of me, calm, good at reading the atmosphere, and empathetic. I've never seen her in a fight. She's nothing like me, who wants to get a qualification and work outside. "Are you okay from the injury? Take better care of yourself." Madison's ever-gentle tone comforted me. "Don't worry about Anthony. He stayed at my place last night and slept with my kids." Without me saying anything, Madison understands. "Why is Thomas so indifferent to us? I get he's busy, but he doesn't even visit you in the hospital and hasn't seen Anthony, right?" While Madison visited, I vented my frustrations about Thomas. Seeing me sighing and lamenting, Madison smiled kindly. "Men are like that sometimes. He's probably under stress we don't know about at work." "Maybe, but not showing his face or concern, that's going too far. Thomas works late, he's not just out having fun, right?" "That's true. We have a comfortable life in our own home because of Thomas. He does earn enough for us." I felt somewhat convinced by Madison's words. "Let me know if you need anything. I can make time to come see you." Talking to Madison lightened my mood a bit. I'll have a proper talk with Thomas once I'm discharged from the hospital. Right now, I just wanted to see Anthony. Mom came from the countryside to help, and after 3 weeks, I was finally home. Mom dropped me off and left immediately due to responsibilities back home. My house felt so nostalgic after 3 weeks. Max greeted me. He barked at my crutches as if they were the enemy. I sat on the sofa and looked around. Nothing had changed. Home really is comforting. Max kept barking at me, even as I relaxed on the sofa. "There are no crutches now." "What's wrong?" Max dove into my bag and pulled out a handkerchief. The one I meant to return to Madison. I had put it in my bag to wash it at home. Max grabbed the hem of my pants and started pulling. He seemed to want to take me somewhere. I managed to get up and followed Max with my crutches. He walked excitedly. Max stopped in front of our bedroom, stood up, and opened the door with his claws. "Why the bedroom?" "Max, what's going on?" Without hesitation, Max dived under the bed and pulled something out with his mouth. It looked like a beautifully patterned cloth. Max dropped it in front of me. It looked familiar. I spread it out and realized it was a scarf. I remembered seeing it weeks ago. Yes, Madison wore it when she visited me in the hospital. But why is Madison's scarf here? I shuddered at an unpleasant thought. No, that can't be right. Madison is my childhood friend, my best friend, and she's kind. I shook my head to dismiss these scary thoughts. Then, Max climbed onto the bed and started pulling at the sheets. I felt as if the blood had drained from my body. If Max was right, it would mean Madison had slept in our bed. Madison's gentle smile flashed in my mind. It must be an overthinking. I talked to Max that no such thing have happened. Madison couldn't have slept here, right? Max gently licked my face. In the afternoon, Anthony came home. Seeing me, he hugged me tightly. Indeed, Anthony is my sunshine. I felt brighter and warmer. I tentatively asked him, "Where did you sleep while I was in the hospital?" "In my room, with Madison and her kids at our place. It was fun." "What does that mean?" "I thought Anthony stayed at Madison's house." "Didn't Madison say so?" My suspicions only grew. Where did Madison sleep then? I bravely asked Anthony where Madison slept. "I don't know. But she and Dad were talking in the living room late, probably drinking too." "I don't know. But she and Dad were talking in the living room late, probably drinking too." I left Anthony and went back to the bedroom. Standing there alone. The thought was overwhelming. Thomas and Madison in this bed while my family and I were ignored. I couldn't believe it. Or rather, I didn't want to believe it. The bed was neatly made, no sign of any disturbance in the sheets or duvet. But could the smell not have been completely removed? And then there was the forgotten item. That Max had noticed it. Since discovering this suspicion, I couldn't sleep in that bed. I started sleeping with Anthony. He was happy, not suspecting anything. Thomas had become a repulsive presence. With so many thoughts swirling in my head, there were many days I couldn't sleep. Where did we go wrong as a couple? When my leg cast was removed, Thomas left the house in a strangely good mood. I had a bad feeling. While waiting for the preschool bus, Madison arrived. She was unusually stylish. Her makeup a bit more flamboyant. "Good morning. You look so stylish today. Got a date?" I asked casually, trying not to show my suspicions. Madison smiled unabashedly. "I've met someone I really like," she said. It was clear now. No proof, but Madison was doing something despicable. She liked the one person she shouldn't. I struggled to hide my trembling, angry hands. After parting with a happy Madison, I returned home, stunned. I couldn't let Thomas and Madison continue like this. It had to end. When I was able to move freely, I decided to visit my parents. That night, I told Thomas about going to my parents' house next week with Anthony and invited him. "I won't go. Got work." "You two go ahead." I knew Thomas wouldn't come. But his smile bothered me. He asked when I was leaving and returning. No interest in me, but he cared about when I'd be absent. I said I'd leave on Wednesday and return Sunday night. "Got it. So you're returning Sunday night." Thomas pulled out his mobile phone and started entering something in his schedule. I could tell why he was so keen on confirming our return date. I didn't miss the smirk on Thomas's face as he fiddled with his phone. The 5 days at my parents' house were wonderful. Anthony was extremely interested in farming, spending every day in the fields with Dad, enjoying playing in the dirt. On our way home, "I had fun. I want to come back," Anthony kept saying. Thinking about the confrontation awaiting at home, I felt heavy-hearted. After I returned from my parents', Thomas suddenly announced he was going on a week-long business trip. Previously, his trips were at most 2 nights long. A week seemed suspiciously long. Seeing my puzzled face. Got a lot of clients to visit. Might even land a big contract. Thomas started talking about work, something he usually doesn't do. It sounded like he was trying to cover up guilt. Yet, he was in a great mood while packing, humming tunes. It looked more like preparing for a vacation than a business trip. Thomas left early in the morning. Even unusually saying, "I'm off." And he left. I heard the engine sound outside. He wouldn't use the car for a business trip. Feeling something was off, I stepped outside and saw our car parked in the garage. Back inside, I casually looked at the shoe rack and noticed Thomas's hiking shoes were missing. You don't pair hiking shoes with a suit. Checking the closet, his outdoor jacket was gone too. What kind of business trip was this? But still, Thomas being away for a week was a fact. I was relieved not seeing him. By then, I had no romantic feelings left for Thomas. A few days later, while cleaning the house after dropping Anthony at preschool, I received a call from an unknown number on my mobile phone. I answered with caution. It was from a hospital near my parents' house, located in the mountains. Shocked by the call, I rushed to the hospital. After picking up Anthony from preschool, we hurried to my parents. I explained briefly to Anthony in the car. Thomas had gotten lost while camping, slipped, and fell down a ravine. He was alive but suffered from multiple bruises and a severe open fracture in his leg. Luckily, he was rescued by local firefighters. It could have been life-threatening if not for the rescue. Initially, Anthony joked, "That's just like Mom." But when I told him about the severity, he became serious and worried. I left Anthony with my parents and headed to the hospital. Indeed, Thomas's business trip was a lie. I knew it, but still, I couldn't contain my anger. I felt too kind for bringing his clothes and other belongings. I also brought an important envelope with me. At the hospital, I learned Thomas was in intensive care. While waiting in the lobby, I heard painful screams. It seemed to be Thomas's voice. I was worried, but also thought it was divine punishment. After a while, a nurse guided me to the ICU. There, Thomas was crying and screaming in pain and fear. His neck was immobilized, and his body was wrapped in bandages. Anthony, seeing him, would probably exclaim, "He looks like a mummy," making a big fuss. He was in such a pitiful state. As soon as Thomas saw me, he pleaded, "Please, take care of me." "Why should I?" I blurted out reflexively. Who does he think he is to ask this? When I broke my bone and was hospitalized. It's a no from me. Ask someone else. And who was it who said that? Then, the curtain of the next bed opened. And I screamed. There was Madison. Indeed, they had gone camping together. Madison was injured too. Not just her arms and legs, but her face and head were wrapped in bandages. Her eyes were terribly bruised. She couldn't move freely. Thomas, with his face immobilized and in pain, hadn't noticed the curtain open. He vented his frustration and pain at me. "Do you even understand my pain? Don't just stand there, start taking care of me." Thomas had fallen from a high place to the bottom of a valley. Of course, it would hurt. He was lucky to be alive. "Like I could understand your pain," I snapped back at Thomas. My patience had reached its limit. Thomas lied about a business trip to go camping with Madison, got into an accident, caused trouble for everyone. And now he's making a scene about being cared for. It's your own responsibility. Be grateful you even got help. I was done extending my hand to Thomas. Our marital relationship was already over. Today, here it all ends. Madison is here too, so it's perfect. Time to settle things. I decided to corner Thomas. I didn't care about his pain anymore. Justice was on my side. Do they call camping a business trip at your company? Or were there clients at the campsite? I didn't relent. I kept pressing Thomas. Do you need to go to remote mountains for IT work and risk getting lost? Thomas glared at me through tears, enduring the pain. Shut up. It's none of your business. You went back to your parents' house, didn't you? Don't lecture me. What an audacious claim. I had honestly said I was going to my parents. But Thomas had lied. I didn't lie. Did you have a reason to lie? Thomas just glared, unable to retort. I turned my back on the silent Thomas and looked down at Madison. Did you follow Thomas and fall too? Madison, grimacing in pain, spoke. Yes, I was trying to help Thomas and we both slipped and fell. So, your fun camping trip turned into a disaster. I snorted. It's not what you think, Elizabeth. It's a misunderstanding. Madison retorted in a small, pained voice. What misunderstanding? It all seemed to be the truth. I insisted on going camping with Thomas. I know this area well. There are hidden spots there. Madison was defending Thomas. Maybe she felt like a victim. Please, don't blame him. Thomas did nothing wrong. Madison was sobbing. The more she spoke, the less truthful it sounded, yet she continued. I didn't mean to hurt you, and I never expected it to turn into this. I'm really sorry. Madison seemed intoxicated by her own tears. Her words felt insincere. I should be the one crying. Thomas, noticing Madison's voice, interrupted our conversation. I just accompanied Madison for her hobby. I couldn't refuse your best friend's invitation. Thomas seemed determined not to admit any infidelity. So, the business trip was a lie, then? Thomas began to get flustered. Victim-playing Madison continued to defend Thomas. Both of you, stop it. This disgraceful affair will only bring more trouble if it continues. It seemed I would be the one to bring retribution upon Thomas and Madison. I was done with Madison's melodramatic charade. I took out an envelope from my bag, which I had brought from home. I spread out the photos from the envelope over Thomas and Madison's bed. Thomas and Madison were speechless. Their eyes wide. The photos showed Thomas and Madison entering a hotel arm in arm, and entering my house, hands intertwined. I had hired a detective when Max found Madison's scarf in our bed. They had been meeting not only during my visit to my parents, but also at other times. Thomas turned red with anger. How dare you do this? Spying and sneaking around. We just had dinner together while you were hospitalized. I almost laughed at Thomas's transparent overreaction. Meanwhile, Madison was still in tears. She covered her face with her hands, but I could see her peeking through the gaps. Maybe Madison was even worse. Thomas's tirade continued. This is fake. You must have fabricated it. He weakly swatted the photos away. You won't admit it, huh? I didn't want to use this, but... I sighed and pulled out an IC recorder from my bag. I placed this under the bed in our bedroom. Thomas and Madison swallowed hard. Sweat trickled down from the gaps in Thomas's bandages. I took my time looking at both of them, then pressed the play button. Don't tease me. I can't wait any longer. I pressed stop and turned to Madison. Do you want to hear the rest? Madison, losing her expression, shook her head side to side. It seemed she was beyond pretending to cry. There's plenty more. You spoke quite ill of me. Stop it. I'm sorry, just stop. My husband muttered softly. I asked Madison how long they had been involved. I was jealous of you. I failed at marriage, yet you lived in such a nice house, living luxuriously. And you were always complaining about Thomas. So, I thought I'd take him for myself. It all started from Madison's jealousy. She envied others. If I had Thomas, I could have a life like that too. What's wrong with that? Madison was defiant. Playing the victim. While listening to us, Thomas tried to snatch the IC recorder from me. Careful! Moving suddenly caused him intense pain. He lost his balance and fell from the bed. Thomas didn't make a sound. It seemed like he had fainted. Madison, shocked, looked at Thomas. I pressed the nurse call button. Nurses arrived quickly, and I was ushered out of the ICU. Once in the hallway, I realized my legs were shaking. I had been strong in confrontation, but I was really scared. During Thomas's hospitalization, I started divorce proceedings. With plenty of evidence of his infidelity, the lawyer said the divorce could be favorable for me. I would demand alimony and child support from Thomas. But that alone wasn't enough to punish Thomas. A thorough division of property was necessary. I sold the house, liquidating it into cash, divided the savings, and split stocks and investments. Thomas's parents came to apologize sincerely. They would oversee the alimony and child support payments. I promised Anthony could visit his grandparents occasionally. I filed a claim for alimony against Madison too. she would repay it little by little. Madison suffered an after effect to one leg from the accident. She couldn't walk without a cane. Thomas's condition was worse. He was close to needing a lower limb amputation. He became wheelchair-bound. The affair, disguised as a business trip, led to severe reprimands at work. He was demoted as a disciplinary action. Though he could have been dismissed, his past performance was considered. No one in the office sympathized with Thomas. He faced cold stares. Having lost the house, Thomas drained his savings on alimony and child support, now living in an old apartment. Without barrier-free access, he struggled with daily life. Recently, Thomas's dad reported to me. Thomas and Madison had broken up. For Madison, a wheelchair-bound Thomas was no longer desirable. Thomas and Madison never imagined things would turn out like this. They must be haunted by regret now, wishing they had refrained from lying and stepping over the line. But it's too late for regrets. Nothing can undo the past. Anthony and I decided to move back to my parents' house and live with them. With my parents around and Anthony starting at daycare, I found time for myself and got a job at a local real estate company. I'm vigorously studying to obtain several real estate qualifications. Anthony, loving the increased opportunities to be in nature, seems to be thoroughly enjoying life here. Every morning, before the sun rises, he goes to the fields with Dad to care for the crops. Anthony loves watching Dad operate the tiller. He must think of him as a hero. After helping in the fields, Anthony heads to daycare, plays to his heart's content, and returns home. Living in the countryside has made him sturdier and more sun-kissed compared to our urban life. It seems being surrounded by nature is better for Anthony. My parents are happy and smiling all day, enjoying the lively atmosphere. Max, the hero of this whole situation, seems to love it here too. He used to be reluctant to go for walks, but now he eagerly awaits them every morning. He loves being in the fields with Anthony and Dad, playing and getting muddy. Recently, during a family picnic by the river, Anthony suddenly stood up. "When I grow up, I want to be like Grandpa." Dad, with a big smile, patted Anthony's head. Mom watched Anthony with joy in her eyes. "I have no intention of taking Joe in. Just put him in some facility or something." Emma, the ex-wife of my recently deceased husband, screamed this to the surrounding relatives, as I still couldn't grasp the reality of losing my husband to a heart attack. We had been married for just a month. The marriage that ended too soon left me with Joe, my husband's child from a previous relationship. Despite his biological mother's rare appearance, Joe never once looked up, remaining hunched over in his seat at the funeral home. Everyone seemed to show sympathy for Joe from a distance, but their attitudes shifted upon witnessing Emma's behavior. It's inevitable, being the child of such a mother, that the child's blood is no good either. Eventually, Mike's relatives started making selfish remarks. "Who's going to take Joe in? Your place, maybe? We definitely can't." I slowly stood up and rushed to Joe's side, looking into his face. "Are you okay? Want to go to another room?" "Hey, you don't need to care for me. I can just go to a facility or something." Feeling a tightness in my chest, before I could even think, I was hugging Joe. I could feel the cold stares of those around us. Then someone audibly remarked, which stirred my emotions. "Raising a dead husband's child is insane." Stepping away from Joe, I clenched his hand and shouted at the relatives watching from a distance. "No matter what anyone says, I will raise this child properly." My emphatic declaration was met with skepticism by everyone at the funeral home. Then, a petite man sitting in the funeral home chairs coughed softly before walking up to me and looked into my eyes. It was Tom, my dad, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. "Are you saying you'll raise that child all by yourself?" "Yes. I will make Mike's child something to be proud of." "Don't be ridiculous." Dad suddenly pulled Joe's arm towards him and stormed out of the funeral home. "My name is Nancy. I lived with a man I met in college, thinking we would marry someday. On an ordinary day, not a special anniversary, he gave me something somewhat like a proposal. It wasn't particularly romantic, but I fondly remember the small, cute flower he gave me at that time. It was a small, star-shaped white flower that grew in a corner of a nearby parking lot. It was a star lily. I didn't rush into marriage immediately after the proposal, but after some time, I decided to go to the gynecologist alone. It was because when I told a friend I might marry my boyfriend, she had asked, "Aren't you going to get checked?" While I was sitting in the gynecologist's clean waiting room, I overheard a conversation. It was between a daughter in her 20s and her mother, discussing the daughter's upcoming marriage next month. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but the mother spoke loudly, mentioning her daughter was there for a bridal check. Receiving my boyfriend's proposal, I came here with the same thought, feeling a bit scared and shaky. What if the examination today reveals some disease? How should I explain it to him? I wanted to ask the chatting mother and daughter sitting next to me. "Hey, if you found a disease, would you still marry your loved one?" The warm sunlight through the window brightened the waiting room. As the parent and child who finished their consultation earlier left with smiles, it was my turn for the examination. When I left the hospital after the examination, the previously sunny sky had turned overcast, looking like it might rain at any moment. Weeks later, the examination results revealed that my body has difficulty conceiving children. Eventually, I broke up with that boyfriend. I didn't explain the reason to him. Or should I say, I didn't want to. I didn't want his sympathy, nor had I ever really wanted children. Avoiding the gaze of children in passing families, I had to tell myself I didn't like kids, or else I felt like I would sink into despair. Years later, I met Mike, a man from a business deal, and I fell for him. Despite deciding never to fall in love again, I found myself drawn to Mike's lonely expression. I asked Mike out. Sitting by the window of a cafe near my workplace, we might have been trying to figure each other out. Then, as if making up his mind, Mike straightened up and began to speak. "I'm actually divorced. I have a son and we live together." "I see. That's okay with me. And besides, I have difficulty conceiving." "What?" "So I want to raise your child as my own." At this point, I had never met Mike's son. But I was determined to cherish him if he was my own. Mike smiled sadly for a moment before whispering in a soft, thin voice, "Thank you." And that's how our relationship began. Emma, Mike's ex-wife, apparently abandoned her household and childcare duties and left the home. It's unclear if that was the direct cause, but Joe, their son, must have felt lonely. Despite being only 10 years old, he would hang out with older friends near the station late into the night. Mike's job kept him busy, often returning home late, leaving little time to connect with Joe. Soon after we started dating, I asked for an opportunity to meet Joe, and sincerely told him that I was seriously considering marriage with Mike. I then decided to visit their home daily, preparing meals and spending time with Joe. I cooked kid-friendly dishes like pizza, chicken nuggets, and pasta, making sure he ate plenty. Initially hesitant, Joe began to open up and show his genuine, childlike side. "Joe, do you like tonight's dinner?" "Yeah, it's delicious." I wanted to stop Joe from wandering out at night, so I would finish my work early and always come by in the evening to cook. That alone made Mike deeply grateful, and a year into our relationship, we decided to get married. Legally becoming Joe's parent filled me with happiness. We didn't report our marriage to my parents. Mike's parents had already passed away. It wasn't that I had a bad relationship with my parents or any special circumstances, I just hadn't seen them for many years. I was raised by my father after losing my mother at a young age. "I'd like to meet Grandpa someday," Joe said, so smiling, and to that, with little hesitation, I nodded. After getting married, I tried harder than ever to cook for Joe and do as much motherly things as possible. But I had no motherly role model. My father was always busy with work, and I don't have many memories of being doted on. Young women, who seemed to be employees at my father's glass factory, would come to keep me company and cook for me in turns. The sound of glass clinking, echoing from the nearby factory until night, still lingers in my ears. When I went to see my father at the factory wanting to see him, I was scolded severely. So, I hid in the shadows and watched him from a distance. From afar, I watched my father staring at the molten glass in the dark factory. There was a very small flower bed in the corner of the factory, where white star-shaped flowers bloomed. I remember vividly picking one of those white flowers and waiting at home alone. As I waited for Mike's return, confirming Joe had fallen asleep, the thought of my father suddenly crossed my mind. I should visit my father. I want to introduce Mike and Joe to him. I was curious about his reaction. As I was about to look up my father's contact on my mobile phone, an unknown number called. I answered the phone. It was cold. The voice of a woman I didn't know, the content, the air, everything felt cold. It was the news that Mike had suddenly collapsed at work and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. I wanted to rush there, but hesitated because Joe was sleeping. And that hesitation is something I would regret for the rest of my life. An hour after being taken to the hospital, I was informed that Mike had passed away. The doctor later explained it seemed to be a heart attack. The cause of death didn't matter to me. What I wanted to know was not why Mike died, but how Joe and I were supposed to live without him. I didn't cry even after Mike died. It was too sudden, and it didn't feel real. Without much thought, I blandly discussed funeral arrangements with the funeral home the hospital referred, and the proceedings went on mechanically. Joe, like me, probably couldn't grasp the reality. Sitting in the funeral home chair with the same expression as always, I looked boredly at the floor. A flamboyantly dressed woman appeared, and Mike's relatives started to argue with her after she approached them. I couldn't hear the conversation clearly, but she was Emma, Mike's divorced ex-wife, seemingly pressing about an inheritance or the lack thereof. Desperately, the relatives explained. "There's nothing like that." Amidst this, it felt like someone had asked what would become of Joe. Emma yelling caused quite a scene at the funeral. "I have no intention of taking Joe in. Just put him in some facility or something. Can't you see he's the one who's hurt the most? Can you not speak so thoughtlessly? Oh, are you Mike's new wife? I heard about you. He died shortly after getting remarried, right? What are you going to do in this situation? You have no connection to Joe at all. You can't possibly feel a bond after just 1 month of being a parent and child, can you?" As I continued to glare silently, Emma shrugged and smirked. "You seem young. You'd better make a choice you won't regret." With those parting words, she left the funeral home. Despite his real mother making an appearance for the first time in a while, Joe never once looked up. Everyone seemed to show sympathy for Joe, but their attitudes changed after witnessing the ex-wife's behavior. It's clear, being the child of such a mother, that child is beyond help too. Whispers began circulating that it's impossible to fight blood and how there's no obligation to raise a child not related by blood. Eventually, Mike's relatives started making selfish remarks. "Who's going to take Joe in? Your place, maybe? We definitely can't. Are you okay? Want to go to another room? Hey, you don't need to care for me. I can just go to a facility or something." Feeling a tightness in my chest, before I could even think, I was hugging Joe. I could feel the cold stares from those around us. Someone said loud enough for me to hear. "Raising a dead husband's child, are you out of your mind?" That's when my emotions surged. Stepping away from Joe, I clenched his hand and shouted at the relatives watching from a distance. "No matter what anyone says, I will raise this child properly. Calm down a bit. You have no obligation to do this. Honestly, it would be better for your future to just put him in a facility." "Shut up. Even if I'm alone, I'll make sure to raise him right." My defiant declaration was met with skepticism by everyone at the funeral home. What would become of Joe's life if I also disappeared from his side now that Mike was gone? I won't let him be lonely like I was as a child. I refused to let that happen. Then, a petite man sitting in the funeral home chairs coughed softly before walking up to me and looked intently into my eyes. It was Tom, my dad, whom I hadn't seen in a long time. "Are you saying you'll raise that child by yourself?" "Yes. I will make something of Mike's child. Don't joke. You have no idea how hard that's going to be." Dad suddenly pulled Joe's arm towards him and stormed out of the funeral home. Ignoring the other relatives' stunned reactions, we faced each other in the parking lot just outside. I followed and tried to pull Joe away from my father, but was pushed back with a strength that belied his small stature. "Your name's Joe, right? I'm your grandfather." "What?" "Yeah. How about it?" "You'd have to move, but would you come live with me? There's a factory near my house where I work. It's a bit noisy." As Joe struggled to respond to the sudden invitation, Dad turned to me with a sad look and said, "Nancy, come home." He suggested it would be sad and difficult for a child to be raised by just a woman, and that I should come back to my family home. After the funeral, the relatives stopped bothering me with unnecessary comments. It was as if they no longer wanted to be involved with Joe and I. I had been determined to raise Joe on my own, but it was just bravado. I was actually scared, anxious, and wanted to disappear. Joe hadn't cried since Mike passed away. And I hadn't yet felt the reality of his death, nor had I felt truly sad. But when Dad reached out to me with a look of concern, something inside me broke free, and I found myself crying in my dad's arms like a child. "Are you okay?" I felt Joe watching me as I continued to cry. After that, Joe and I vacated our apartment and left home. Dad came to pick us up, and we headed to my childhood home in his car. The scenery passing by the car window seemed melancholic, making me feel as if the memories I had with Mike were drifting further away. Upon returning home, a new life for Joe and I began. From his first day at the new school, something was off about Joe. I casually encouraged him, saying it's not easy to make friends right away, and sent him off to school as usual the next day. I started helping out at the glass factory my father ran. Inside the factory, a few male craftsmen were blowing glass to make dishes. My job was to inspect the finished glass products, picking up each item one by one and wiping it down with a cloth. I felt deeply moved, now as an adult doing the very work I was scolded for watching from a distance as a child because it was dangerous. Among the employees, there was a veteran lady who used to take care of me, and she happily remarked how the once little Nancy was all grown up. Though Dad no longer manufactures glass as an active craftsman, he was chatting with what seemed like a salesperson at a small desk near the workshop. I occasionally watched the glass blowing process from the corner of my eye while doing my job. The sight of the molten glass glowing orange in the furnace, being gathered on the end of a long rod and blown into a balloon-like shape, was nothing short of magnificent. I felt a slight desire to try it myself. But there was no atmosphere for beginners to experience glass blowing in this factory. The craftsmen worked silently, fluidly forming glass. Realizing that my father was the one leading these skilled craftsmen filled me with a bit of pride. At that time, I believe I was doing my best to adapt to this unfamiliar new life. And Joe probably was too. At a school PTA meeting, a nosy parent told me about Joe's situation at school. It seemed that the fact Joe and I were not blood-related had already become a neighborhood rumor, and many students at his school were talking behind his back. Hearing this left me with a heavy heart as I started to walk, filled with various thoughts. I had been completely unaware of this, unable to even imagine it. It was something I should have considered, yet it had never crossed my mind. Mostly, I was overrun with regrets, excuses, a desire to escape, and the strong wish that Mike was still here with me. Returning home, I walked down the hallway and knocked on Joe's room door. "Joe, can I come in?" "Don't open it." Joe's somewhat hoarse voice came through. After taking a breath, I quietly said, "I'm sorry." "Joe, if you're okay with it, could you tell me about what's happening at school?" Joe didn't respond. I stood in front of the door for a while before eventually giving up and starting to prepare dinner. Day by day, conversations with Joe dwindled. Perhaps he sensed my forced smiles as I tried to inquire about school. He stopped sharing anything about his daily life. Eventually, Joe stopped going to school and began shutting himself in his room, living like a recluse. Though he was supposed to be at school in the mornings, it seemed he returned home after I left for work. Even at work, where I needed to concentrate, I found myself thinking about Joe, leading to mistakes like dropping freshly made glassware and getting scolded. Dad noticed my distress and offered to talk with me. However, I felt unable to share my troubles with my father, who had left me to focus on his work during my childhood. Yet, Dad kept calling me after work. "Talk to me if something's wrong," he would repeatedly say. Despite his insistence, I couldn't bring myself to confide in Dad. Each time he said to talk to him if something happened, it felt as though he was reminding me to protect Joe, leading me to ponder every night until I came up with an idea. One morning, I quietly handed Joe a mobile phone while he was eating breakfast. Seeing his suddenly brightened expression, I smiled a little. "I bought a mobile phone, matching with mine. If it's hard to talk about school stuff, you can text me. I might be able to help." "Okay." Joe carefully cradled the new mobile phone placed on the table with both hands. For a while, there was no contact from Joe. Considering I hadn't had time to teach him how to use the mobile phone, it seemed natural, until one day, I suddenly received a message. It was written that he had learned how to use the mobile phone from a kind employee at the glass factory, so he decided to send a message. Gradually, though sparingly, he began to share things about school through messages. As a mother, I wanted to do everything I could, but even after hearing about his school life, there wasn't much I could do to help, except to send encouraging words through messages. Still, I wondered if that had made Joe happy. After getting the mobile phone, he started going to school regularly and began to lead a normal school life. Even as a middle schooler, he went to school diligently without causing any major problems, and eventually became a high school student. By this time, Joe had stopped needing to communicate through messages and would talk to me face to face about his day at school, impressing me with his candidness. One holiday, Dad took Joe for a tour inside the glass factory. It was near the high-temperature furnace used for forming glass, an area I had been constantly warned as a child to stay away from because it was dangerous. Watching Joe being carefully taught and experiencing making a basic glass cup filled me with immense joy. From that day on, Dad spent his weekends and days off teaching Joe how to make glass. Dad's glasswork was artistic. It gave a special sensation, almost as if holding the drink directly. Time passed and Joe was in his junior year in high school. He wasn't interested in going to college, nor was he enthusiastic about getting a job, struggling to decide on a career path. The pressure from teachers and the inability to choose a post-graduation path until winter might have been partly my fault as his parent. During weekends, while I was busy with paperwork in a corner of the factory, Joe and Dad would take breaks together, sitting and staring at the heated glass furnace. Does it make sense to do manual work in an era when most factories are transitioning to machines for glass production? Joe asked Dad out of curiosity, to which Dad responded with a thoughtful look, crossing his arms. During his adolescence, it's unclear how Joe viewed Dad as a craftsman, but Dad seemed to ponder deeply over Joe's words. "People say our job is a dying industry. But we're still making a living out of it, which means there's value in it. There are people who appreciate the glass I make. Aren't you scared of going bankrupt?" "I'm terrified, to be honest. Bankruptcy is scary." I brought over cups of coffee to them, using the glass cups Joe had made as practice. Dad looked at Joe's glass and sipped his coffee, showing a hint of sadness. "When machines started taking over the glass industry, I was young. Nancy was little, and I didn't have time to play with her. Every day was filled with fear and no room for relaxation. I was desperate not to lose my mind from all the work. I wonder if Mom was lonely too. Probably. I hardly took care of Nancy. The thought that she had only me, her only family, scared me to death. Dad looked around the factory. I lost my wife shortly after starting this company. But I didn't have the luxury to mourn. I needed money to raise Nancy. I had to keep the company going to support my employees. I was desperate not to make my beloved daughter sad. Dad. Pathetic, right? I was just a man who could only think of himself. Hesitantly, I reached out and touched Dad's hand. His hands were thin but large with long fingers. Hands that had crafted countless glasses. I knelt before Dad, eventually wrapping both hands around his. Something resonated within me. As if something was speaking to my heart. Thank you, Dad, for raising me. Didn't you listen? I didn't do anything. I was just desperately afraid of becoming hopeless. No, I knew you were. I knew Dad was working hard for me. I used to watch my father work hard from outside the factory, always finding ways to pass the time at the factory entrance. The handmade flower bed that changed with the seasons had been planted by someone. Then one day, when I was still young, one of my employees taught me who had been making these flower beds. I was told it was Dad who planted them. There was no way Dad could be interested in flowers. Surely, it was planted for me, thinking all girls like flowers. Now, no more flowers were planted there. When the star lilies that had sprouted from seeds carried by the wind bloomed around the factory, Joe graduated high school and started working at Dad's glass factory. Dad, who had been focusing more on paperwork, began working with glass again. The intricate glass works he created was purely magnificent, and both Joe and I respected him for it. As time passed, Joe married a woman introduced by Dad and built a duplex house. Insisting we live together despite my initial refusal. Dad was also invited to live with us, but he refused. I can't sleep unless I'm near the workshop. Eventually, when my grandchild was born and Joe was busy with work, I took care of the baby. Walking with the baby, I pointed out Joe working in the factory. Look, there's Dad. I tilt my grandson's face slightly to look at Joe. Without saying a word, the baby suddenly pointed at a small star lily at our feet. The delicate star-shaped flowers scattered around the factory, and as I set the baby down, it happily played with the flowers. What are you doing? That's dangerous. Joe came out of the factory, scolding yet looking at his child with joy. I hope to protect this small life that lies beyond this smile forever. The shining moment of life, that's a wedding. It's the important day when you become the star. That's why you want to make it a memorable and wonderful event. Everyone would think so. Especially for a bride, it's something you absolutely want to succeed. But what if it gets ruined? What if the groom's family is the one who ruins it? Be grateful we're taking you as our daughter-in-law, says Ben, my father-in-law. We'll teach you proper manners. Be thankful, says Emma, my mother-in-law. My parents' word is law. Obey everything, says my husband. Could you tolerate such a thing? I'm Mary, 25 years old. I work as an office clerk at a small company. I met my boyfriend, Tom, through work. Today, we went to Tom's parents' house. We're getting married, so we came for a family meeting. Tom's parents, whom I'm meeting for the first time. Standing in front of their large house, I swallowed nervously. Don't be so tense. Relax, they're my parents, says Tom. Yeah. Do I look okay? Will they accept me? Don't worry, you'll be fine, Tom lightly says and reaches for the front door. Nervously, I enter the house. We're greeted by Tom's mom. A woman with her hair neatly tied back, giving off a calm aura. Nice to meet you. I'm Mary. First impressions are crucial, so I greet her energetically. Then, so you're Tom's. Emma says just that and retreats to the back. I'm taken aback when Tom urges me to come inside. I feel like my efforts are being undermined. In the living room, a man, presumably Tom's father, is already seated on the sofa. "Hello, Dad," Tom says. "Nice to meet you. I'm Mary." I greet him, thinking this must be Ben. Then, behind his glasses, sharp eyes pierce through me. "So, you're Tom's girlfriend." Quite plain, but sit down anyway. Again, I'm taken aback by his words. What? Plain? Sure, I dressed modestly today, but to say it to my face. The atmosphere is unpleasant from the start. Is this normal when meeting a son's fiancé? Amidst the awkwardness, I sit on the sofa as prompted. Tom sits next to me. An uncomfortable silence follows. Ben crosses his arms and closes his eyes, while Tom casually plays with his phone. After a while, Emma comes in with coffee. "Thank you," I say, but Emma just looks at me without a word. Extremely awkward. Why is it so awkward? Thinking that these will be my in-laws makes me a bit reluctant. But marriage is about patience, right? It's not easy to get along with people from a completely different background all of a sudden. Anyway, I just need to be patient for now. It would be troublesome if they opposed our marriage because they disliked me. I stayed silent, not wanting to stir the waters. "So? We've decided to get married." Tom finally spoke up when Ben urged him. "Hey." It's an important conversation, and he's casually mentioning it while fiddling with his mobile phone. That's what I thought inside, but I definitely couldn't say that in front of my future in-laws. I sighed inwardly and turned back to them. "I may not be perfect, but please. Why did you choose such a plain woman?" "Excuse me?" I was about to introduce myself when Emma cut me off. And she said something unbelievable. "Plain, that's what Ben called me earlier too. Tom is very handsome, as you can see. He deserves a more beautiful woman. How could our son choose someone like you? It's a shock to me as a mother. Do you understand?" "I'm sorry." How am I supposed to understand that? Should I say he's not that handsome? That would probably end badly. I apologized, suppressing my swirling emotions. Feeling the injustice of why I even had to apologize. But Emma's onslaught didn't stop. First of all, Tom had better marriage proposals. The daughter of a prestigious patisserie, the young lady of a major IT company. All from beautiful families. And you've ruined all those opportunities. How will you take responsibility? Responsibility? If there really were such amazing proposals, I'm sorry. But why do I have to apologize for that? Tom, on his part, was no help. Why isn't he supporting me? Feeling my glaring gaze, Tom hastily looked up from his mobile phone. "Mom, that's enough. I chose Mary because I want her. Don't nitpick." "But you..." "Emma, that's enough. You're making Mary uncomfortable." Still, Ben. Even when her son and husband told her, Emma still seemed to have something to say. Ben stopped her and then looked at me. "By the way, what do your parents do?" "My dad is a salaried worker, but my mother passed away when I was young. My father, not finding anyone he loved more than her, didn't remarry and raised me by himself." When I shared this, they looked surprised. "From a single-parent family, I see." "Oh, single parent, huh? What's with that tone?" "Both of them together." The stifling atmosphere didn't change, and that was the end of the day. My unease never cleared up until the end. Tom did say he had no intention of marrying anyone but Mary, but I could feel the mood of almost yielding to his parents' pressure. I'm feeling uneasy. This house, it's full of nothing but labeling, calling everything plain or criticizing for being from a single-parent family. I forgot the uneasiness I felt back then in the midst of the busy wedding preparations. There was just so much to do. Staying within the budget meant not all wishes could be fulfilled. I only had one chance for a dress change, so I spent a lot of time choosing the dress. I was satisfied with the flawless piece I selected. Negotiations with the venue, preparing the invitations, there were so many things to take care of. It was a hectic period at work too. Before I knew it, 3 months had passed, and the wedding day arrived. After the ceremony in the church chapel, I took a moment to breathe in the waiting room, and then my father came in. "Congratulations, Mary." "Thank you, Dad." His eyes were red. The walk down the aisle earlier in the church, my arm linked with his. He cried all the way until we reached Tom, the groom. "Dad, you're crying too much."
"Can't help it. My little girl is getting married. I wish your mother in heaven could see this."
"I'm sure she's watching from above."
"Yes."
It must have been tough for a father to raise a daughter alone. I had my rebellious moments during adolescence. There were things easier to consult with a mother, not so easy with a father. Our relationship strained, and at times, I rebelled fiercely. But now, as an adult, I understand. My father was always there, watching over me. Clumsy, but he truly loved me and took great care of me. "Dad, thank you for everything. I'm going to be happy." He cried again. "Oops." The moment I smiled, he was overcome with emotion and burst into tears. Then the reception started. The bride and groom's parents sat beside them. Next to me was naturally my father alone. He managed to stop crying, but his nose was still runny. I watched the ceremony proceed with a wry smile, thinking, can't be helped. But one thing was bothering me. My in-laws. Across from Tom, my in-laws were eating and drinking voraciously. In such situations, the bride and groom are the main characters and hardly get to eat anything. You have to listen attentively to speeches from bosses and friends, and you have to smile even at dull performances. Nervous and attentive, there's no time to eat. Even my father only occasionally sipped water and hardly ate. In contrast, my in-laws just kept eating. And drinking. We had arranged for quite expensive wine, but they drank it like water. It was as if they were trying to get their money's worth. With a strained face, I decided to enjoy the reception. But the incident happened right after that. It was during the candle service when we were about to express our gratitude to our parents. First, it was my turn. Me, Tom, and my father stood up. Just as I was about to read the letter I had prepared. "What's this, a letter to the parents? To a single parent? What's there to say? He probably didn't even raise you properly." It's true, there's such a thing as the air freezing in a place. I felt the room freeze. Who made that remark just now? I looked around in surprise. It was Ben. "Ben?" As if to interrupt my astonished voice, Ben raised his tone even further. "Seriously? Sending us a daughter with no manners? How do you plan to support us without a decent income? Excuse me? What is he talking about? Supporting them? I might understand if it's about Tom's support. But why does my income matter?" Confused, I tilted my head, and Ben pointed at me and yelled. "Listen. We're taking you as a daughter-in-law, so be grateful. If you have any gratitude, send us money every month." Excuse me? Shocked, I remained still, and then Emma spoke up. "Really? Such a plain daughter, we didn't really want her. Even the dress she chose is plain, unbearably plain. Being from a single-parent family, you probably weren't raised properly. It's a good opportunity. You're becoming our daughter-in-law, so we'll teach you manners. Be thankful." Emma? Apparently, the two were completely drunk, their faces bright red. Perhaps this was their true feelings coming out. I couldn't believe my in-laws could think this way. I was just stunned. In a panic, I looked at Tom. "Your parents are saying such things, but this must be a mistake, right? Support? Manners? They're just drunk, right?" Verbal abuse towards his soon-to-be wife. I expected Tom to get angry, but my expectation was quickly betrayed. "What? What are you talking about? My parents are saying it, so as their daughter-in-law, it's natural for you to obey, right?" Excuse me? What's that supposed to mean? Don't worry, don't worry. If you follow Dad and Mom's instructions, nothing will go wrong. That's how someone outstanding like me was raised. Well, I did choose my marriage partner myself. Mary, you'll be fine. If you listen to my parents, everything will work out. Tom wasn't drunk. He hadn't drunk a drop. Yet, these words. What are you talking about? Support? Manners? That's ridiculous. The moment I vehemently objected. Tom's face, twisted in a way I'd never seen before, loomed in front of me. Anger filled his expression. What? You don't understand? My parents' word is absolute. As their daughter-in-law, you must obey everything. Don't you get it? This is why single parent. The moment I heard Tom's words, something inside me snapped. I felt cold. It was too much. I'd had enough. In an instant, my love for him vanished. I couldn't understand what I had ever seen in this man. I turned around, feeling completely detached. And my father, seeing my face, nodded subtly. "Shall we go?" he said. "Yes, let's." My father and I stood up simultaneously and started walking towards the exit. "Wait!" Tom and his parents were stunned. "Hey Mary, what's this joke?" "You're the one joking." "Don't touch me." I reflexively brushed off Tom's hand as he tried to grab me and turned towards the attendees. "I apologize to everyone who took the time to come here today. Today's reception will be canceled here. We will make amends at a later date." I greeted everyone firmly and solemnly. "What are you doing, making decisions on your own?" Tom was panicking. "Shut up. How can I continue after being ridiculed to this extent?" I had never directed my anger at Tom before. But this time, it had exceeded my limits of patience. "Mary, what are you doing? You're bringing shame upon us. I won't forgive this. I don't need your permission. Don't you understand the atmosphere here? Continuing the reception in such a frozen venue is abnormal." At my remark, Emma hurriedly looked around. Company colleagues, relatives, friends, many acquaintances. Their gazes were cold. The three of them, subjected to a mix of astonishment and anger. It seemed they finally realized their unreasonable behavior. Emma started. "It was just a little joke," she said. "Too late." "What joke? How can such despicable behavior happen at such an important occasion?" That's right, there's a limit to making fun of someone. Marrying into a family like yours would be pitiful for the bride. You should definitely call it off. Boos started all at once. The in-laws and Tom turned pale. Then someone stepped forward. It was my father. Indeed, Mary did go through hardships. Being raised only by me might have had its inconveniences. But I believe she turned out to be a wonderful daughter. I listened silently to my father's words. At least, she's not a daughter who should be exploited and disciplined by you. What about you, after all? What's wrong with us? Parents who exploit money from their DIL, a son who doesn't even try to protect his bride. To me, it seems like you're the ones who failed in parenting. Voices of support rose from all over the venue at my father's words. The three of them, subjected to blame, turned paler. Then I stepped forward. And I said, "Tom, I will not marry you. I'm better off without a family like yours. Don't involve me in your life again." At these words, Tom finally started crying, and the family of three left the venue as if fleeing. A big round of applause erupted from the venue immediately after. The applause, marking the finale of the cancelled reception, made me smile wryly as I held my father's hand, and he returned the smile. What happened afterward? Of course, the marriage was called off. Fortunately, we hadn't registered the marriage, so there was no record of divorce. Tom, I thought he might come crying and begging, but instead, he became defiant and insisted on reconciling, but of course, I politely declined with a smile. The chaotic scene at the reception quickly spread among the company and beyond, as company colleagues were also invited. He faced judgmental glances and, amidst the discomfort, was transferred to a distant rural sales office. It was essentially a demotion. Right up until he moved away. "I'm sorry. You're the only one for me. I'll wait forever." He kept sending messages. I just smiled and blocked his number. Tom's parents became pariahs among their relatives. Somehow the news of their mid-reception exit spread, and they're living quietly, almost hiding in their neighborhood. "Please, come and be our DIL to clear up the misunderstanding," they pleaded, but what was that all about? When they became too persistent, I warned them that I might take legal action, and they finally quieted down. Since then, the two followed Tom to the countryside. I hope they never come back. For years have passed since then. In my arms is a small life. After what happened, I thought I wouldn't marry for a while, but life is unpredictable. I met a man through work and am now living a happy married life. "Mary, let me hold the baby too," says Dad. "David, you just held him, it's my turn now," says Nick. "You get to hold him every day, I only get to occasionally, let me have a turn," Dad protests. "Both of you, it's time for the baby to sleep. You can hold him again later." I smile wryly at my father and husband vying for the baby. Feeling the baby stir in my arms, I think to myself, "May your life be filled with happiness. Just like my father raised me happily. With love, as he loved me. I will protect you. Because I love you. So, may your life be filled with immense happiness." "Hey! Open this door! Are you out of your mind? I won't forgive you." Probably, that's what they're saying on the other side of the thick door. But I can't hear them, and frankly, I don't need their forgiveness. Facing the three flustered fools on the other side, I waved with a smile and said, "Let's go. Wonder if you can make it back safely? Good luck." My name is Leah, a 30-year-old office worker. I'm a newlywed, married for just a year, with no kids yet. When I was single, my hobby used to be taking day trips using the train on my days off. My friends would sometimes ask, "Don't you get lonely traveling alone?" But I find it surprisingly pleasant to move at my own pace without a fixed schedule, more so than traveling with others. Well, to be honest, there's a bit of loneliness, but the fun outweighs it. I have a favorite travel magazine, and sometimes I plan trips based on it. As I went about my days, I noticed something.
Huh? Isn't that the same guy I saw last week?
It seemed coincidental, but after the third time, I might have thought it was fate if I were a romantic. Instead, I just felt a bit scared. But it turned out he felt the same. Sorry if I'm mistaken, but didn't we meet last week and the week before at completely different places?" He approached me with a slightly scared look. "Wait, do you think I'm following you?" To clear up the misunderstanding, I opened my travel magazine and said confidently, "I'm just traveling based on this magazine." Surprised, he responded, "Me too." And opened the same magazine, smiling happily. That was how I met my husband, Henry. He turned out to be a really interesting guy. I, being cautious by nature, always end up carrying a lot of stuff, but he said, "I always travel light so I can move easily. Nowadays, with cashless payments, you hardly need cash. A mobile phone is enough." He laughed joyfully. Talking with someone with such different values was very stimulating. We hit it off discussing our favorite travel destinations and exchanged contacts that day. Though we both liked solo trips, we started going out together more often. Surprisingly, I enjoyed sharing memories with someone else, and I found that local food tastes even better when shared. One day, after about 6 months, Henry asked me to go out. I didn't feel bad at all, in fact, I felt the same way. And remember being very happy. We decided to get married 6 months into our relationship. I thought our happy newlywed life was just beginning. But my expectations quickly shattered due to Henry's parents. My parents-in-law, Jack and Aaliyah. Their house is about a 30-minute drive from ours. They are still in their 50s, with Aaliyah working part-time, and both of them are employed. Initially, they used to visit our house, but lately, we've managed to maintain a reasonable distance. However, an incident occurred that disrupted this balance. "Hey, Henry. Let's go here on our next day off." I agreed. Sounds good. Our post-marriage tradition of mini trips to tourist spots continued. As usual, minimalist Henry recently reduced his belongings to just a mobile phone, even entrusting his wallet to me. It feels so light. "I don't look like someone who's about to go out at all, do I?" And said with a contented smile. I thought to myself, at least carry your own wallet. But it wasn't really a bother. It was an ordinary conversation, but that day was different. "Oh, by the way, Dad and Mom's wedding anniversary is coming up soon. How about we invite my parents on our next trip?" I tensed up at Henry's sudden suggestion. Of course, there was a reason for that. But I couldn't just say no, so I responded.
Yeah, that sounds good. We haven't seen Aaliyah and Jack recently anyway.
Unaware of my slightly strained face, Henry didn't notice a thing. The next day, "They were really looking forward to it when I called," he told me. "I guess I have to give it my best shot." So, I steeled myself. Honestly, I'm not comfortable around my parents-in-law. They're not bad people, just not a good fit for me. I'm more on the reserved side, not fond of noisy places. And this applies to people too. Talking to high-energy people can be mentally exhausting for me. Speaking of my parents-in-law, they are incredibly cheerful. When I first met them, their exuberance overwhelmed me. "Nice to meet you, I'm Henry's mom. And I'm the dad," they announced loudly like comedians, making me stiffen up involuntarily. That time, the four of us, including Henry and his parents, went out to eat, and they chose the restaurant. I wonder if it's their favorite place? I thought casually, but when we got there, it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. Meeting their son's girlfriend for the first time at such a casual place made me laugh. "We're so nervous today, we haven't eaten anything since morning," Aaliyah, who didn't seem nervous at all, said cheerfully to me. That's right. Plus, we have to get our money's worth." The true reason for skipping breakfast was quickly revealed by Jack. Their loud voices attracted quiet laughter from nearby tables. I was embarrassed by then and wanted to go home. Looking sideways, thinking Henry must feel the same, I was surprised to find he wasn't there. He had gone to get food. Not to be outdone, the parents-in-law also got up, piling their plates with food.
Are they planning to hibernate after eating so much? Can I really become part of this family?
I managed only a forced smile at their overwhelming presence. I barely ate that day, nervous as I was. Feeling uncertain about the future with Henry, I was touched when they said at parting, "What a wonderful girlfriend, Henry. He may be awkward, but please take care of Henry from now on, Leah." I was simply happy to hear that. I loved him too, and I thought the parents-in-law weren't bad at heart, so when he proposed a few months later, I had no hesitation. But it seems I'm not good at judging people, as at our wedding, the bridegroom's parents, my parents-in-law, completely disregarded the ceremony and focused only on eating, leaving my parents utterly disillusioned. Henry has a brother, Jonathan, who seemed to be the only sensible one. "I'm sorry my parents showed such an embarrassing side. It's really shameful." He came to greet us politely, as I heard from my parents. Jonathan, who lives alone, seems to have a poor relationship with his parents. It appears the feeling is mutual, as they once complained. "That boy is always so noisy with his complaints. Just the other day, he bragged about buying several eggs when it was limited to one per person, and I'd scolded him for it." Seemingly annoyed. "Don't you feel guilty about benefiting yourself at the expense of others?" That's what Jonathan apparently replied to Aaliyah. Hearing this story, I thought to myself, isn't that a fair point? What's wrong with that, Aaliyah? I honestly felt that way. When the parents-in-law came to visit our new home, they arrived empty-handed. That wasn't a problem, but then they started rummaging through our shelves, exclaiming, "Isn't this the snack they're advertising on TV? I've been wanting to try it. Oh, and this one too." They foraged through my hidden snacks like they were on a treasure hunt. Even though I bought those snacks, Henry, without any malice, said, "If you want them, take them home." That's fine, right, Leah? I wanted to smack him right there and then. Ah. Sure, go ahead. All I could do was respond with a forced smile. I had a suspicion, but it was clear now. The parents-in-law were moochers. "I want this. I want that. Give me. Give me." In the early days of our marriage, they came over every week, sensing an opportunity, and I was almost driven to neurosis. Hey, don't you think there's something off about Aaliyah and Jack? They're kind of annoying. My anger exploded, and I ended up fighting with Henry. Despite how angry I was, Henry looked puzzled and said, "No, not really. Is it that strange? They've been like that since I was a kid. Don't worry about it," he said, patting my shoulder lightly, which made me furious. Are you kidding me? If this keeps up, I'll divorce you. Just do whatever you want. My raised voice seemed to alarm Henry, and he quickly put an end to the parents-in-law's invasions. I don't know what Henry said to them, but since then, we've been living peacefully. However, the thought of traveling with the parents-in-law naturally made me anxious. On the day of the trip, I was shocked to see them waiting. It's been a while, Leah. I heard you've been busy with work. Must be tough. Aaliyah spoke to me, but I was far from calm. The reason lay in the appearance of the parents-in-law. Aaliyah and Jack, where's your luggage? Looking closely, Aaliyah and Jack had brought nothing with them. Even for a day trip, isn't it normal to bring at least a bag? We wanted to be ready to move quickly, and I have a sore shoulder. Their response, echoing something I'd heard before, was baffling. The rest of the trip went as badly as I'd feared. It was soon revealed that the parents-in-law had forgotten their wallets. Feigning ignorance, they said. That's strange, isn't it? Watching them play dumb, I thought. Maybe it's better to just call off this trip, or even cancel it, yeah. Unfortunately, my feelings weren't understood. Henry, looking exasperated, said, Again? My folks have always been like this. I'll cover for them, but make sure they pay me back. It seemed the trip would continue. As the parents-in-law laughed and apologized, all I felt was disgust. Even after we arrived at our destination, the parents-in-law's rudeness didn't stop. They complained to the store staff. Isn't there any free tasting? Wow, stingy, huh? When I, feeling thirsty, bought a drink and hadn't even taken a sip yet, Aaliyah said. Can I have a sip of that? I'm thirsty too. I can't believe I forgot my wallet, huh? While I forced a smile, an exasperated Henry intervened. Stop it, it's embarrassing. Look, I'll buy you one. Overhearing this, Jack muttered under his breath, referring to me. What a stingy woman, lacking compassion. I didn't miss his comment. I could say the same to you. I should have left at that point, but I was a bit stubborn. A similar incident happened twice more afterward. Apparently, the first trip was so enjoyable that Aaliyah contacted Henry for another. When I saw them on the station platform, I couldn't help but feel chills. The second time they brought their wallets. They brought their wallets this time, but when the moment came. Oh no! This is the wallet I used before. I rushed out in such a hurry. Their obvious lie was something only Henry would believe. And on the third trip, they forgot their wallets again. By then, it was clear, it was a deliberate act. Aaliyah. Excuse me, but did you deliberately forget your wallet? You never intended to pay, did you? I hit the nail on the head, and her face turned red. Hey, what a rude woman you are. Apologize to Aaliyah. Jack glared at me, demanding an apology. No way. I've thought this for a long time. Both of you are just too greedy. Caught in the argument with the parents-in-law, Henry seemed at a loss. Tourists around us watched curiously. Noticing their gaze, Henry seemed to feel ashamed and finally, "Stop it, please." He broke down crying. I was honestly disillusioned. But the parents-in-law reacted differently, rushing to a crying Henry. "I'm sorry, Henry. It was my fault. You're so kind to cry for me," Aaliyah said, with Jack quietly standing beside her. I didn't know how to react to this farce. Only one thought came to mind. Yeah, this is impossible. Let's get a divorce. That was all I could think. Seeing Henry's tears, the parents-in-law seemed to lose their fighting spirit. "Leah, we know we're often in the wrong. It's Henry's money, but still, we've taken advantage of him. It's Henry's money, after all." I don't know why they said it twice, but their words, dripping with sarcasm, showed no real remorse. And so, it was confirmed that they had deliberately forgotten their wallets. Aaliyah referred to it as Henry's money, but we both work, and his salary is only slightly higher than mine. Our actual incomes are not much different. Recently, every trip with the parents-in-law ended with, "I want to buy this too. Maybe some gifts for the neighbors as well. What's that? Looks tasty. Hey, Henry. Buy that for me." Because of their endless demands, Henry's credit card bills were shockingly high. We've been living mostly on my salary for the past few months. At the time of marriage, I considered it family money and believed in spending within the limits of our allowance for personal desires. Don't be a burden to your partner. The thing that infuriated me the most was when cashless-reliant Henry exclaimed at our travel destination. "What? Only cash here? Hey, Leah." He called me over and pulled his wallet out of my bag. It only had a few dollars in coins. "No. I messed up. You know I don't carry cash, right?" And he said without malice. It still makes me furious thinking about it. For the record, I always paid for my own things. Yet, the parents-in-law probably thought I was living off Henry's money and just complaining. We split living expenses, so such accusations were nothing but unpleasant. Thinking all this, I coldly watched Henry crying and Jack consoling him. After a moment of thought, I said, "I was wrong too. Sorry for being presumptuous. You guys go ahead on the train. I'll buy some drinks and follow." I smiled calmly, and Henry and the parents-in-law happily boarded the train. Their smiles turned to panic a few minutes later. When I didn't return, Henry must have felt something was off, as he messaged me. "Leah, are you coming? The train is about to leave." Right then, the heavy doors slowly closed. From the platform, I had a clear view of Henry's panicked face. It seemed he noticed me and was shouting something. I was replying to his earlier message. "I'm divorcing you. If your parents are so important, live happily with them. Goodbye." I ignored his calls, thinking, doesn't he care about being a nuisance on the train? Geez. He sent several messages afterward, but I ignored them all. Henry's face through the door slowly turned to anger. "Hey! Open this door! Are you crazy? I won't forgive you." As if he was saying. As if I needed his permission. The parents-in-law seemed to be yelling too, but of course, I couldn't hear them. Smiling at the three fools, I said, "Let's go. Wonder if you'll make it back safely? Good luck." The train quietly departed, quickly disappearing from sight. That train won't stop for a while. Walking back would be quite a challenge. After watching the train leave, I hurried home to pack my bags and left. I stayed with a friend I'd been discussing divorce with. Henry's barrage of messages continued until they suddenly stopped. His phone must have died. He often forgot to charge it before bed, and it was only at 20% this morning. Portable battery chargers are essential. That was Henry's mantra, but his crucial portable battery charger was in my bag, along with his wallet. I left all the belongings he entrusted to me at home. He must be panicking by now, but that's not my concern. While planning my next steps with my friend, my mobile phone rang. The caller was unexpected, Jonathan, Henry's brother. Leah, I'm sorry. Did something happen? According to Jonathan, Henry's phone had run out of battery, and in his panic, he dropped it, shattering the screen. Unable to reach me, the desperate parents-in-law could only think of one person to call. So, I got contacted, but all I got was ask Leah for the reason. He seemed unwilling to say more. I told Jonathan everything about Henry and the parents-in-law without holding back. As I spoke, I could hear Jonathan's voice getting sharper over the phone. From the other end, Leah's making a fool of us. Tell her off, Jonathan. The in-laws were loudly insisting that Jonathan, with his way with words, would outtalk me. After I finished explaining, Jonathan snapped. Hey! You scoundrel! Are you stupid? What? You scoundrel? I had heard from Aaliyah that when Jonathan gets really angry, he becomes intimidating with a high-handed tone. And since Jonathan only speaks sense, Henry and the parents-in-law can't retort when he gets like that. I could hear the in-laws arguing in the background, but I quietly hung up the phone. Henry was not content with the divorce, but after I conveyed through a lawyer that I wanted to divorce without any further contact, he reluctantly agreed, accompanied by Jonathan. Later, Jonathan told me that the ex-parents-in-law had always been terrible moochers, disliked by neighbors and even school associates. When Henry returned to the ex-in-law's house, he quickly became the talk of the neighborhood, and now all three hardly ever go out. Henry's colleagues, not knowing what to say about the quick divorce, were treating him like a delicate subject. I'm glad to cut ties with them after this incident, Jonathan told me with a laugh. The ex-parents-in-law were known at the local supermarket for their outrageous behavior. This is expiring soon, so give me a discount. It's a little damaged, so I'll take it for free. Jonathan expressed his long-standing embarrassment and disdain for his parents' behavior. Recently, Henry has been seen joining them, reflecting their blood connection. It turned out the ex-parents-in-law were both gambling addicts, often skimping on food expenses, which explained their constant hunger and lack of money. When asked about the reason for my divorce, I can only say it was a difference in values. If anyone can tolerate such behavior, they must be incredibly broad-minded. It was just too much for me. I've continued working and even started a side job as a web writer after my travel blog caught a publisher's attention. I still travel, combining it with writing assignments. Solo travel seems to suit me best. Last month, I earned a decent income from writing, so I'm planning to take a vacation to a resort somewhere far for relaxation. I'm still only 30 years old, life is just beginning.